All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you. So thank you for joining us, joining the Board of Education this evening. Please mute your cell phone as we begin this meeting. Today is Tuesday, December 10th, 2024, and this meeting is now called to order at 6:30 p.m. Would you all please stand and join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance? Thank you. All right, would any board members like to make changes to the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to our 4.0 recognitions and reports. So we just want to like to invite all of those who are being recognized tonight to stay for a group photo at the end of the very last recognition. So we'll go through several of them and then we'll do a group photo at the end if we could. Thanks. And then we have...
So thank you. Tonight we are excited to celebrate excellence in the district in the areas of education, sports, and humanity. Leading the celebration is our Executive Director of Communications, John Cope. Welcome, John.
Good evening, President Draper, Superintendent Kingsley, and Board Directors. We welcome everyone in our audience, including those watching online. Tonight we'll have 3 recognitions, and I'm excited to introduce our first of the night, which is Zach Elementary School, for earning their 2nd National Blue Ribbon Award. I'd like to invite Angel Herrick to the podium.
It looks like a lot, but we have 2 minutes. We'll be quick.
Hi, my name is Angel Herrick, the proud principal of Zach Elementary, and these are some of our teachers and students. And what we recognized was, we had the governor come visit, we've had a lot of celebrations, but our students have not had a chance to speak yet, so we give them that opportunity. So the question that I ask our crew is to say your name first, and then what is one thing you're proud of or you love about Zach or yourself?
My name is Lucas. I'm 5 years old. I'm in Zach because I have the best teacher ever. She taught me to learn and write.
Great, thank you.
My name is Parisha. I like Zach because they're loving teachers.
Okay. This is all from the hip, so we'll see.
My name is Dylan. I am 8 years old, and I like Zach because it inspires us to be creative, and it inspires us to use our imagination, and it also inspires us to show RAR, which means being responsible, organized, attentive, and respectful.
Good job.
My name is Remy, and what I love about Zach is it's a very welcoming place. No matter who you are, you'll always be welcome.
Mi nombre es Eduardo y yo estoy en la escuela de Zach Elementary y es la mejor escuela que he tenido en mi primera vida.
My name is Eduardo. I love SAC because it's the best school I have ever had.
Hi, my name is Seeking Cadence and I'm 5th grade, and one thing I like about SAC is the community because they motivate, and motivation is the key to learning.
Cadence, crushing it.
I'm Laura Actor, and I'm our English language teacher, and I just love that diversity is celebrated at ZAC, and all of the kids learn from where they're at.
My name is Julie Grell, and I'm a 1st grade teacher at ZAC, and what I love most is the community and parental support we receive every day.
Thank you all so much for this recognition.
Next, I'd like to congratulate Timnath Middle High School's track and cross-country teams for their state championships. I'd like to invite Jesse Morrill to the podium.
All right, thank you so much for having us here tonight. We're excited to celebrate some really incredible accomplishments athletically here at our school. Emily Dunn, our athletic director, and I were just remembering when we were here about 3.5 years ago, we got to present to the board about the naming of the school and the mascot and the colors. And that really did kind of kick off our journey. And over that time span, we've had a lot of growth, a lot of just incredible achievement, hard work from our students and staff, and some really great things that have happened, and it's really incredible. But this is a unique accomplishment that I want to start with recognizing Emily Dunn. So she's over here in the end. She's our athletic director. Yes, give her a round of applause. Emily has done an amazing job really building an athletics program from scratch by hiring incredible coaches and really being focused on a character-based program where we strive to win, which we're winning some, and this is an example, but without making that the purpose. And the purpose of the program is about supporting students with building work ethic, competing with character, building sportsmanship, and just kind of creating some transcendent experiences that you'll take through your life that are going to help you with whatever you do beyond sports. But part of how she's done that is by hiring incredible coaches. And our coach, Matt Miltenberg, he is our track coach and our cross-country coach. He's also a counselor at our school and was a part of our implementation team, really was instrumental in helping us create a vision for the school and really think about what we're all about at Timnath in terms of our character, our culture, and the learning that happens within our school. So we're really lucky to have Matt as our head track coach and head cross-country coach. And he has done an amazing job. He's just like the perfect coach to kind of build a program that's character-based in the way that we've envisioned. So he is now going to take over and recognize all these incredible student athletes for their accomplishments in this past spring and fall. Matt Miltenberg.
Thank you. Our vision at Timnath for building our cross-country and track teams has been to build a tradition that is competitive and inclusive with an emphasis on character and a team-first mentality. And that team-first mentality has led to some great team results. So last spring, our girls track team was the 2A Colorado State champions. They scored 131 points, 1 point shy of doubling second place Heritage Christian's 66 points. And that was led with 5 event championships. So 5 state championships led by individual championships in the 300 hurdles by Addie Garretts, and repeat state champion in the 800 meters, Natalie Washburn. And then the true story was our dominance in the relays. With our girls combining, we had Natalie Washburn, Izzy Schimmelfennig, Aisley Stone, and Jensen DeAngelis winning the state championship, our second in the 4x800 meters. And then Emily Volker, Hannah Bittner, Alex McKnight, and Lily Eisbrenner teaming up to win both the 4x100 meters and the 4x200 meter relays as well. This fall, we moved up in cross country to the 4A division. As news spread about these girls and the great environment that they make for a team, our team almost tripled in size. Starting in mid-September, they went on a run and did not lose again until the November state championships, where they won, taking first place over second place Battle Mountain High School. Izzy Schimmelfennig earned her 3rd All-State First Team honors after winning the conference and regional crowns as well. She finished 3rd at the state meet. Addie Garretts turned in another top 10 finish, finishing 9th and earning second team All-State honors. And then all 5 of our scorers, including Louisa Stribley, Natalie Washburn, and Rachel Dietrich, earned All-State honorable mention honors. And Gray Jordan and Jensen DeAngelis completed our championship squad. All 7 of those ladies, plus Emily Baki, earned all-conference first-team honors for 8 all-conference first-team honors on that team. It's been a magical ride with these young ladies, and we're just super excited to see them compete again this spring. Thanks so much for recognizing them.
Our final recognition of the evening will be Drake Jenkins for his heroic efforts and recognition from Denver Health Paramedic Division for assisting a woman who was trapped under her car. At this time, Emily Dunn will explain a little more about Drake.
Actually, Jesse, but it's all right. Yeah, all right. Well, let me introduce you to Drake Jenkins. Drake is standing right next to me. He is a junior at Timnath High School and is just an all-around great young man. He's just an excellent student. He's a star baseball player for our again, up-and-coming baseball program, and just a really great example of character, always doing the right thing, modeling the way. He's been a great leader at our school just by the way that he acts and conducts himself. But this fall, he did something really remarkable. And we got an email from a man named Will Dunn with the Denver Health paramedic, who wanted us to know about this heroic action that Drake took. I don't think he would have ever told anybody other than, I think he told his parents what happened, but he's just a humble guy who probably wouldn't have shared this story otherwise. But here it is. So Drake was on his way to DIA earlier this fall. He was actually driving himself there. He was meeting his parents in California for a nonprofit event for a cancer charity. Which is pretty awesome. So he was out there doing good things, giving his time in a volunteer way already. When he got there, he's driving into the parking area at DIA when he noticed that there was a woman in trouble. The woman had pulled too far past the ticket dispenser, and so she put her car in reverse to back up to reach it. She was still too far away to pull a ticket, so she opened her car door to reach it, and then her foot came off the brake. And her car moved, started going in reverse. She actually fell out of the vehicle and under the vehicle, and she had some significant injuries as a result of that. Drake was right behind her. He got out of his car, realized what was happening, and intervened. He was able to get into the woman's car, get it to stop, and then rendered assistance to her until DIA Emergency Services got there. His quick actions most certainly prevented further injury and likely saved her life. This quote from Will Dunn, the paramedic, he said, "I'm not sure he realized then or if he realizes now that he placed himself in peril to do what he did. He risked his own safety to come to the aid of a stranger." Will Dunn is also nominating Drake for a Civilian Life-Saving Award with the City of Denver. And we were just so impressed and amazed to hear the story. And it lines up with who he's been at our school, that this is something that Drake would do. So we appreciate the board allowing us to recognize Drake in this way, in a public and formal way. And we are just very proud that he's with us and that he's a Cub. Drake Jenkins.
PSD congratulates all of those who are honored here tonight, and this concludes our recognitions. I want to invite everyone recognized and our board directors and superintendent to join us down for a group photo, please.
Okay, Zach Elementary kids over here with me. We'll be right out front. Come over and sit down with me. Right here. Oh, I'm sorry. Track or cross country? Cross country. I've got some of these. We'll need to share these with the crew. Maybe for holding for the picture. Cross country, cross country. Awesome. More cross country. Track and field. Pass it to a track and field. Great job.
I bet you're always saying, "Excuse me, I've got to move my trophy." Sorry, my trophy's in the way.
You got it? Are we good? Congratulations, everybody. Well done. my job. I'll go home and you can sit in the big chair up there. 30 years? Okay. Next time.
You don't have to give them that long. It's pretty awesome.
Have a great evening.
Well, before we head into our next one of superintendent report, I just want to take a point of privilege to say just how impressive that was. You know, when we talk about what PSD is doing and the great work that they are doing, notice that everything that we just talked about was about character. It was about what people are doing for each other, what people are doing for strangers. And that is what PSD is all about, and that is what makes us so unique, and just these kids so very impressive, and I just want to say thank you. It's really an honor to be here. And now we have a superintendent report.
That was a really nice segue, so thank you, President
welcome.
Draper. Good evening, everybody. It's great to be with all of you tonight. I agree with President Draper. That was incredibly inspiring, and I'm sure that, you know, my heart is swollen as a result of just being associated with good human beings like that. I want to acknowledge on behalf of Director Havelda, who is not well tonight and he's participating virtually, that he's obviously physically not here, but I wanted to let you know that he is participating online, and he asked me to make sure that you knew that, and we're all, I know, appreciative of his commitment to continuing to move our governance forward. Which is becoming, I don't know if it's tradition just yet, but maybe a habit of starting my superintendent remarks with a quick win celebration. I'd love to have everybody pay attention to our screens around the room to talk about one of our recent graduates being a first-generation college goer as a result of some incredible financial philanthropy in our community.
My name is Ramon Barajas. I graduated this year, 2024, from Puder High School. I knew for sure I wanted to go to college. I just didn't know which one just yet. One side towards CSU, and living here in Fort Collins, CSU was a clear choice because I didn't want to be too far away from my family. I knew I wanted to go to college, but financially, I was scared to apply for college because I wasn't sure if me and my family could afford it. Scholarship I got through the PSD Foundation really helped me achieve my goal of going to college and getting into a school of business. I've always been more of a business person. I wanted to get more into it. I wanted to know the laws behind it, the rules, what it's like to own a business. And I heard the College of Business here at CSU was actually really, really good. I want to give a big thank you to the PSD Foundation for giving me the opportunity, the confidence to come to college, because not everybody can. And I know this is such a privilege to be here today on this campus. So I want to thank the PSD Foundation for giving me that opportunity here today.
This feels like a brag Tuesday, but we have so many incredible things that are going on. I want to congratulate Ramon on not just going to college, but just being an incredible student for PSD for quite some time. He's got an incredible family. I met all of that here at a scholarship event at Puder High School, and I couldn't be more proud to be associated with families like his, as well as the PSD Foundation. I am so grateful, this district is so grateful for the PSD Foundation support, specifically to how many students they actually help with college as a result of their philanthropic efforts. They are about to celebrate their 25th anniversary, and if you are listening or here in person or online, I want you to know that today happens to be Colorado Gives Day. So if you are interested in benefiting students like Ramon through the PSD Foundation, you can go to coloradogives.org right now and look up the PSD Foundation and have the opportunity, if possible, to provide a financial contribution to extend those particular opportunities to other students moving forward. We have another school in our mix that had another celebration recently, a little bit bittersweet, but I'm going to ask staff to pull up a couple slides here. Wellington Middle High School recently participated in the high school football state championship a little over a week ago. They had an incredible season. Unfortunately, it didn't end the way that they liked. They ended up losing that game 42-36 on a suspicious call, I will say. But the celebration here is not just in the players and their character, but I would tell you the entire town of Wellington and all of the businesses and parents and extended resources, the parade that they had down to the stadium and on the way back, how that town has come together to rally, not just around football, but around our students, around our school district, has been nothing short of just amazing. I'm in absolute awe of what's going on. If you think about it, I think this is their third year of playing football since we've reopened Wellington High School. So the future is super bright up there, and a lot of students will continue to be in the mix moving forward. So while it was a bittersweet ending, like Timnath Middle High School, who is also at the same level of existence and already a state championship, we have another group of students to celebrate up in Wellington in the very near future, and I couldn't be more proud to be their superintendent. Over the last 2 weeks, I had a chance to visit 7 of our schools. I won't talk about all of them, but just there's a lot of really great things that are happening, not just to focus on character, as President Draper talked about, although I see that a lot in a very significant systemic way, but how we're tending to our core academic business has been really, really amazing to see as well. Just yesterday, I had an opportunity to visit every single classroom at Beatty Elementary School with their principal, Cale Whitaker. The co-teaching model is super strong. I was really impressed with the art instruction that was happening at Beatty yesterday. It's one of a unique model where, I don't know if you had an experience like I did, where every student created the same piece of artwork based upon a model of the teacher. The teacher there is really specific around teaching a skill and allowing the students to express what that looks like to them in any different modality that they want. So the type of art that the students were creating at Beatty was very specific to their personal interests and passions, and I left there quite inspired. Last week I had an incredible tour where I went to just about every classroom with 2 5th grade students at Olander Elementary School, and how these 2 5th grade students talked about the level of inclusivity and why inclusivity matters, how they tend to character, why all of their clubs and participation and engagement matters, not just during instruction, but throughout the course of the school day. There's a lot of really, really great things that were happening, and those students gave me one of the best tours that I've probably had in my 27-year career. And then yesterday, I also had an opportunity to go to Tavelli Elementary School, and I met with one of our first-year school psychologists. His name is Zane, and he was matched and paired with their local school counselor, Sarah, who was equally as incredible. And the energy in these people's eyes around what they can do to enhance the well-being of their students was really, really impressive. Zane went on a tour to try to identify what students need and want in order to help regulate themselves, like what types of activities help them feel calm. And they actually created 2 rooms across the school. One's called the cave, and the other one is the jungle. And the cave is where it's kind of dark. It's a quiet time. It allows people to calm themselves for a few minutes and get back into instruction. And the jungle is for students like me who sometimes can't sit still and need to work out some of their energy. But seeing all of the different activities that those 2 people were working together to make sure that their students had access all throughout the course of the day to high levels of instruction, but also being aware of their feelings, being aware of how their body expresses their feelings, and being able to put words to those things, I thought was really, really impressive. There's a lot of great things that are happening across the district. As we think about the things that we're here tonight to talk about, I want to start off and pivot here a little bit by thanking our voters. One of the great parts of tonight is we are going to talk and outline the various summer projects to our facilities that we're going to be able to tackle this summer as a result of this community helping support 4A. And we couldn't be more proud. A promise made has to be a promise kept. And tonight we are going to continue to outline what that work is moving forward. We're not waiting for a year. We're going to execute on many of those projects now. 2 schools will get air conditioning units for the very first time in their existence. And so I look forward to hearing a great presentation there. We'll also hear some work about our various committee structures, 3 specifically, our Mill Levy Oversight Committee. We'll talk about a comprehensive planning committee to talk about some of the various challenges that not just deal with declining enrollment in our facilities, but also boundaries and wanting to make sure that, like last year, for many of us felt like an event. We want to normalize that work, so we're looking at that every single year, not to traumatize people and make it more emotional, but to normalize that we need to grapple with hard things in a consistent way and educate our community consistently on the things that we're thinking about. So I really appreciate the board asking for that committee to be jump-started. And we'll also talk about SEAC, a committee that has been talked about at length in this boardroom, and I look forward to a robust conversation on that. The last thing that I will share is, while 4A is going to be absolutely transformational for this district, specific to our capital investments and our facilities, I do think it's important as the superintendent to signal that our financial challenges that we're experiencing as a district are not solved. There are a multitude of things that are very real. We found out today that as the October count recently got cleaned up, our district is 441 fewer students than we had a year ago. And if you were to take 441 students today and put them in one school, it would be the 6th largest elementary school in PSD. So that's real. We're also grappling with this future speculation, current speculation about the future of potential losses of federal funding that we're uncertain about. That is really difficult to make sure that we're planning thoughtfully and appropriately to serve, especially our most marginalized students, which is where the predominance of those dollars go. I would also say, as we've recently all as a community and as a state learned from our governor with his proposed budget, that part of his proposal was to eliminate per pupil averaging in his budgetary process for K-12. The impact locally to PSD is almost $1 million, but it's important to know that across the state, that's a $191 million reduction to K-12 education, on the heels of our legislators celebrating that education was fully funded. I have a hard time accepting that truth. We also know that the lack of housing affordability in our community continues to present a challenge. As we do get new dollars, we have to think of creative ways to ensure the majority of those dollars go to supporting salary for our staff to be able to afford to live in our community, which we're not there yet. We need to be honest about that. But as we think about distributing more monies to compensation and salary, in many instances that doesn't allow us to put more money in our classrooms for students. And we shouldn't be put in a scenario as a school system where it's not a both and. It's an either or today, and that's not acceptable. I share that with you because just dealing with one of those issues, we can manage that. But dealing with the multitude of all of those challenges in the aggregate makes it really messy, hard to understand, and incredibly complicated for us as a governance team. I'm hopeful and optimistic, though, that we will figure these things out by doing this work together, and I look forward to having a thoughtful meeting with all of you in the community tonight. So thank you for allowing me to have some remarks.
Thank you, Superintendent Kingsley. And now we're going to head on to the community comment portion. So welcome to the community comment section of the board meeting. The board desires to hear the viewpoints of all stakeholders, including students, employees, parents, guardians, and community members. Public comment is designed to address issues, not personalities or personnel matters. Please keep your concerns and comments focused upon the district and appropriate for a K-12 audience. Please note that the board does not generally respond to remarks made during community comment. Our lack of response should not be construed to mean that we agree or disagree with what was said or with the description or interpretation of events as presented by any speaker. Further, even if some remarks may be factually inaccurate, we generally choose not to respond or correct the record here because formal board meetings are not the time or place for back and forth dialogue. As we begin this community comment session, let us model for our entire community how to listen and how to interact respectfully even with those with whom we disagree, for we all have the students' best interests at heart. So this opportunity for public comment is for members of the community who registered to speak by the designated deadline. Those people will be called on to make remarks in the order that they signed up, and each speaker will be allowed 3 minutes to address the board. So first up, we have Stephanie Watson-Lewis. Welcome.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Superintendent, and thank you, Board. I'm sorry for my hoarse voice tonight. I'm here to address some issues that my child has experienced this year and last year being a part of PSD. We are a family that is a part of Liberty Common, and my son has received some what I think most people like to call bullying, but I would call racial harassment. And we're just trying to navigate around systems to try and figure out how to best support other families that are going through this. Unfortunately, since I've come forward, a zillion other families have too. And I'm starting to realize that it's not just a Liberty Common issue, but it's a PSD issue. And I'm here tonight to just go over the fact that PSD has 16 open OCR complaints. And I'm really just wanting to hear what the plans are moving forward in supporting these families that are experiencing discrimination. I know Superintendent and I have met before privately to discuss our family matter, and he's come out into the community to wrap around the people to talk about and to hear them talk about their experiences. But unfortunately, I'm hearing from the community that nothing is being done. So I'm concerned moving forward, and I'm asking, what is PSD doing to protect children that are being discriminated against? I would like to say that, you know, just at my own school, Liberty Commons, I've gotten 4 phone calls from families in the last month where their kid's been called the N-word. Their kid's been told that they're slaves, or their parents are slaves, or that they're poop because they're black. I mean, this is just very concerning. And there's no other way to put it. And when I think about everything that's happening, and I look at all the people that are responding to me online, it's not just about race. It's about my child's not getting the proper services, or I feel like I'm being pushed out of a school because my child has a disability. So I'm really asking the board and you, Superintendent, unfortunately, I'm putting everybody on the spot, but I'm really asking, what are we doing for our community to really rectify the discrimination that we're seeing? And it's huge. I mean, we have to say something, see something, right?
Yeah. I'm sorry, but you're going to have to wrap up. Sorry.
But it's not working. It's not working. So what are we going to do?
Thank you.
Thank you.
And next up, we have Anna Labetta. Welcome.
Good evening. In 2017, I attended an orientation for becoming a foster parent in Larimer County. I still vividly remember the group being asked to list stereotypical behaviors we might anticipate from kids who are in foster care. The list sounded a lot like this: scared, angry, sad, trust issues, big behaviors, fight, flight, freeze responses, anxiety. The facilitator picked up where we left off and said, exactly, because these kids have experienced trauma, and this is appropriate and normal behavior for someone who has experienced trauma. If they did not have a trauma response to their trauma, then something would not be right. I will be forever grateful for the amount of time and energy Larimer County required of us as prospective foster parents to learn about trauma and trauma-informed practices prior to certification, as well as the extensive resources we have received each year since to further our understanding. It has literally changed the lens through which I see the world and how I respond to the world around me. 3 weeks ago tonight, I watched a parent of one of Zanala's victims peacefully hold signs outside of this building on an evening that community comments were omitted from the agenda. Most of the people who attended the meeting that evening were already in the building by the time she arrived, and only a handful of people walked past her on their way into the meeting. With the meeting well underway, this parent wrote a handful of comments in sidewalk chalk near the entrance of this building as a last-ditch chance that evening to evoke thoughts around decisions that had recently been made in PSD. Then she left the premises. A week later, she received an official notice that she's no longer allowed on any PSD property, other than pickup or drop-off, scheduled meetings, or public events, so long as they are isolated to her daughter's school. Over the past year and a half, I have watched this grieving parent advocate boldly at Board of Education meetings for appropriate checks and balances that will benefit all of our children in this district. In light of the tragedy her own child endured, I have seen her fight for better protocols around busing, only to see policies that could have been proactively strengthened weakened to protect the district. I've seen her advocate for more transparency and accountability to no avail. These families are stuck in real-time trauma as they've yet to receive closure by seeing effective policies and safeguards put in place to further prevent child abuse and PSD. When I see this parent, I see a parent who's experienced both trauma and secondary trauma as a result of the events that have occurred in this school district. I believe with my whole heart that things could have been so different if these families had had their concerns heard to begin with. Since then, there have been so many missed opportunities to help these families start to heal by addressing concerns. But instead of acknowledging and connecting with their legitimate fears, these families are stuck in their raw trauma, stripped of any grace to respond with emotions appropriate in light of their trauma without being seen as problematic. I'm asking the district and Board of Education to please consider seeing these families through a trauma lens and take into account the traumas and unaddressed fears that have fueled subsequent behaviors, and to please rescind the trespass order and instead replace it with a one-time warning. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Leah Casper. Welcome.
Members of the board, thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I'm here to address an issue that has been ignored, sidelined, and swept under the rug from the negotiations table for far too long. Fair pay for paraprofessionals. Since 2017, I have served PSD as a para substitute, ILS para, and effective needs para. In this time, I have experienced the full emotional and physical demands of the role. I have been kicked, I have been hit, I have been bitten, I have been defecated on. I have been verbally abused by students that cannot control their own behavior. This we sign up for. Seeing the growth and success of the students I serve remains the most rewarding part of my job. Paras like me work directly with students more than anyone else in PSD. We provide one-on-one attention, adapt general curriculum, and meet our students' unique needs. This requires a specialized skill set, including interpersonal and adaptive skills, that are essential for the success of the most vulnerable student populations. Despite this, paraprofessionals hold some of the lowest paid positions in the district. Working full-time hours over 40 hours a week, although only being paid for 37.5, I often can't afford the groceries or basic necessities that I need to provide my family. Even while working another job, I also survive off of food stamps, Medicaid, and low-income housing, while bonuses for leadership and administration are nearly twice the annual pay for paraprofessionals. I am not alone in this struggle. 700 IS staff surveys indicated a significant need for improved para support. Paras across the district face similar challenges. Colleagues have shared with me that many of us are underpaid and our hours aren't enough to support our students effectively. We often use our own time to adapt assignments, organize classrooms, and create an environment conducive to learning. Despite these challenges, we do this job because we care about our students and love to see them grow and succeed. It's long overdue for paras in this district to receive an equitable wage and benefits package. We are the backbone of PSD, working tirelessly with the most vulnerable students. Tonight, I urge you not to just listen with concern or empathy or with misty eyes, but to act for immediate and emergency pay increase with equitable benefits for paraprofessionals. This will improve our work environment, which is also our students' work environment.
This will also wrap up.
May your hearts and ears be open to the words of my colleagues tonight, and may the board's care transform into action. I know together that we can create a better and more equitable future for paraprofessionals in PSD.
Thank you. Thank you. Next up, we have Tori Pappas. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Tori Pappas, and I have a first grader at Beatty Elementary. Beatty's HVAC upgrade is on tonight's agenda. We welcome and appreciate whatever can make our building more conducive to learning and teaching. And we also welcome and appreciate open, thorough, and transparent communication around this project. Aside from getting AC this summer, there's a lot of really exciting things happening at Beatty. We had a packed event last week that highlighted the various specials that we offer. I had a lot of fun being led by my son through all the different programs. There was independence and personal choice alongside structured and guided experiential learning. It was impressive to see how he navigated the crowds and stations so comfortably and confidently, an area that he struggles with typically. Even in the art room, his least favorite subject, he was really excitedly explaining all the different watercolor techniques, and I guess Miss Carnahan's doing something right. I believe that Beatty has played a role in his progress, and his confidence has grown because he has a learning environment where he knows he belongs. I believe he feels valued at Beatty, and that's why he's thriving. The teachers also feel supported at our school. According to their TLCC survey responses, which far exceed district averages, Beatty teachers agree that our school is a safe place to work and for students to learn. When teachers and students feel supported, valued, and safe, they show up. This is evident through Beatty's 94% attendance rate. Another impressive number is that we are currently enrolled at 256 students. That's 9% higher than what PSD projected for this school year. Finally, our current performance plan is 86.3, with academic growth at 97.5%, again, well above district averages. Beatty is serious about developing sustainable systems that reflect, listen, and work. I see this being prioritized during our PTO and school accountability committee meetings. The energy is really exciting. Beatty is rocking all of these accomplishments as an underfunded small school. I can only imagine what we could accomplish with more adequate funding. 4A can help, especially by keeping small school support to fund truly small schools. Clearly define what a small school is and then distribute that funding equitably between those schools. I personally can't wait to watch my Beatty Bighorn become a Blevins Bruin. It's going to be awesome. Thanks.
Thank you. Next up, Erin Green. Welcome.
Thank you for the opportunity to provide public comments tonight. I reject the idea that once public comments are allowed, that then you can then restrict or mute my First Amendment rights. It takes far more integrity to protect speech that is critical, contains content that you disagree with or find offensive. Diversity and inclusion can only be ideals of the district if you accept that those ideals mean you have to include opinions and viewpoints that are different than your own. To reject that and to teach our children that it's appropriate for the government to restrict expression of ideas is concerning. Careful of the lessons that you teach our children. My comments tonight focus on the District Special Education Advisory Committee, or SEAC. I want to make it clear that my comments are mine alone, and I'm not here to represent that group as a whole. The district pretends that it values stakeholder input when it actually only values the perception of that, and SEAC is a great example. If you've ever heard that SEAC decided, you are being intentionally misled. Some examples. SEAC decided not to have public attendance or public comments at its meetings. That's not true. We discussed it. 2 parents advocated for it. There was not any sentiment expressed to the contrary, but SEAC is not empowered to make decisions. It only advises the director. If you had heard that SEAC chooses some of their topics now, that's not true. A non-transparent survey was distributed. The director is choosing topics, and are we going to talk about transportation safety, accommodations for extracurricular activities after the OCR finding, the abysmal declining graduation rates for IS students, equity for IS students, and boundary or school consolidations are all topics that are not likely to be addressed when a secret survey only provides confirmation bias to the director. If you heard SEAC decided not to include representation from other district boards into our meetings, I have heard this, but it was never brought up in a SEAC meeting. Again, we have many voices and many recommendations, but our charter dictates that only the director decide. To represent it any other way is misleading and avoids accountability. Internal meetings are different than stakeholder input. Spots on SEAC dedicated to parents are routinely filled with staff members who are also parents. But in discussions with staff members, they confided that they're unable to participate as parents, that there are consequences, that they have to keep their district hats on while making suggestions in that group. If you want to have an internal IS committee, you should do that, but don't pretend that SEAC is stakeholder driven. Finally, I would advocate that the state SEAC allows public attendance and public comments, as does CDE. Don't believe the narrative that we run our SEAC based off the state model. Why would you not want to hear these concerns locally when the alternative is to have these comments addressed at state level meetings? PSD reputation is growing. Your values are being exposed at the state level. Is that really the alternative that you're pushing for with this model?
I'm sorry,
Please
you're gonna
allow
have to wrap
public comments at SEAC meetings. Thank you.
Thank you. And next up, we have Danny Lawrence. Welcome.
I heard a board member once say they felt public comment was sacrosanct, and that is defined as regarded as too important or valued to be interfered with. And I couldn't help but notice when I registered for comments tonight the new subjective mute button language. Recently, PSD issued an order to a Zanella victim's mother that she is no longer allowed on district property, which prevents her from making public comments, because PSD will remain the one last standing district that doesn't allow for telephonic public comments. I feel it's abrupt. It shows little regard for people that are already hurting due to district actions. And I ask, how would you like Sabrina to express her concerns for the safety of other children when the district employs so many of the same people who allowed her daughter to be beaten on a school bus and failed to appropriately report the crime? After watching video of her daughter walking down a school bus aisle toward a standing bus driver facing her, while Zanella kicked her behind her knees, sending her to the floor and throwing a heavy backpack on top of her, with a bus driver smiling, how did you want Sabrina to respond to that? Because contrary to the district's response, this isn't a one-employee crime. You can't ignore real emotion and expect positive outcomes. So was the sidewalk chalk the right response? I don't know. I'm not going to judge how someone who has been mistreated and disregarded while being egged on by your staff expresses their grief and anger, and I don't think you should either. As a parent, I am struggling to politely express my outrage at the outrageous. Being ignored, muted, restricted isn't treating public comment as sacrosanct and is being felt intentionally as targeted disrespect. Here are a few things at the moment that I find outrageous. Lack of follow-up on the transportation report that was made last spring. Are the cameras installed? Because I'm hearing they're not. And how is that video retention going? You were supposed to update us by now. Agendized meeting materials that are not being allowed to be spoken in public comments, which feels like a violation of the intent of the revised statute that it was written for. Parents with IEPs unable to get needed documents due to encryption. A district that is failing the dyslexia community so blatantly. Committees that operate like your schools with no oversight or district-wide policy. And districts that approve charters and then advocate their oversight of the racism that occurs in them. Trespassing crime victims that express their outrage. And for clarity, when an employee's name is listed on an agendized meeting materials, is it or is it not allowed to be spoken in public comment? Because your policy doesn't address it. And the district did not answer this question directly in the October 23rd email exchange with Ms. Herrick. In the core request that resulted from the Post-it note that was exchanged by all of you during the meeting, it appears that you too were confused about it. And for that reason, and one of grace and understanding, I am asking respectfully, Mr. Kingsley, that Sabrina's speaking privileges be reinstated, at least in this limited space. Before you notice more people infringing on their First Amendment rights, please offer some clarity on your newfound policies. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Lacey Nixon. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Lacey Nixon, and I was a paraprofessional at Blevins and recently moved to Rocky to be a para 2 in the Affected Needs program. I love being a para. It is so rewarding. I get to help students be successful in many different ways, but today I'm here to speak about the urgent issue that affects not just me, but many of my colleagues across the district. This should and cannot wait until negotiations, as it is a critical need that should be addressed immediately. You have the power to make this change because the students are the ones that are suffering right now. Paraprofessionals are not fairly compensated for the vital role that play directly supporting the most vulnerable students. Not enough income leads to challenges retaining quality staff, paras are unable to live where they work, and paras holding multiple jobs, which are all unsustainable and negatively impact students and staff in so many ways. Paraprofessionals are vital members of our schools. We work tirelessly every day to support students, help our teachers, and more. We spend the most time directly supporting students in our integrated services program. But despite all we do, the truth is paras cannot live off the para pay because it's below the living wage needed in Fort Collins. I still live with my grandpa because I would not be able to afford to live independently on my own income alone. I've also moved positions so I can move from a para 1 rate to a slightly higher para 2 rate just to meet my basic needs. This was not something I wanted to do due to my school community or students, but I had no other option when I had to make more money. We are passionate about our jobs, but the reality is the wages are simply not sustainable. As of today, there are over 23 unfilled para positions in our district. Does that not concern you? It should concern all of us because it means the students those positions are supporting are not having their needs met, and the IEP services minutes are likely not being fulfilled. The only way they're being met is through other staff members is doing more than one job every day to meet the responsibilities and requirements of more than one person's position. This often falls on other paras or IS teachers. I'm here tonight asking for your action and attention. We need fair compensation for the work we do. Paras are essential, and without us, many students would not receive the level of support to succeed. I urge you to recognize the value we bring to the classroom and act swiftly to address this issue. People say that where the district spends the money reflects the values and priorities. Please show paras like me that the work we do is valued. Our students deserve the best, and that starts with supporting the dedicated paraprofessionals who work with them every day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Next up, we have Kate Green. Welcome.
In accordance with policy GP 313, my comments tonight are made on behalf of Sabrina Herrick. To start out, I would like to talk about a public comment that happened back on November 5th. I want to be very clear that your staff can write letters supporting your new HR director until their hands fall off, and it will never mean a thing to me for one very simple reason. Words of support shut down the investigation that should have kept 11 children safe from a child predator. It didn't even take letters upon letters and a snide public comment that totally wasn't intended to cause the victims more pain. It took only 4 words. He's a good guy. Which actually ties in quite nicely with my main point for the evening. For the sake of accurate meeting minutes, I'll be clear. My main point is that I object to this district silencing their critics with trespass orders. 11 disabled children got beaten for an entire school year. And the response? Parents of the victims having to track you down only to get canned answers deflecting blame onto the state legislature. Form letters from someone now named in a lawsuit for knowingly hiring a child abuser. Form letters directing parents to take their victimized children to either SEAC or another mental health clinic that shares a board member with this board. A member of this cabinet telling district committees that he doesn't think such a massive failure in his own department warrants policy change, and then that cabinet member leaving of his own accord 8 months later. A third-party audit that you still haven't released to the public a year and a half later, and another audit that even cherry-picked for positivity revealed issues in this district that would get an animal research facility shut down. Security upgrades that guarantee Zanella version 2.0 will have less evidence to support a conviction, not more. And finally, staff turning up en masse to applaud the decision to promote a person who, by all publicly released accounts, had a hand in the abuse happening. And now, You've trespassed a parent of one of the victims for quote-unquote harassing staff, all because she thinks that a promotion deserves public discussion, not more of the privately emailed letters and gray rocking that she's been subjected to for the past year and a half. It took an entire school year for this district to find somebody with the tiny shred of a moral compass required to properly investigate the blatant child abuse. But when it's sidewalk chalk that you felt harassed an employee who wasn't even present to see it, 3 days. That's all it took for you to sign a trespass order. Your priorities are clear. Looking good is what matters to you. Somewhere along the way, you forgot that step one of looking good is doing good. So, rather than listening to families who have been harmed by your bad policies, you prioritize telling a mother how to grieve the harm that you caused her family. A little advice for you. Rules exist to promote decorum of morality, not the tissue paper facade this board hides behind. So if you are going to tell the people that you'll mute them for disrespect, start by doing something worth respecting. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Suda Uktik. Welcome.
Hi everybody, my name is Sweta Uchtuk. I'm 17 years old and a junior at Rocky Mountain High School. Today I'm here to discuss the need for scoliosis screenings in middle schools. Scoliosis is the sideways curvature of the spine. The most common type is adolescent idiopathic. The cause is unknown, but it develops around the ages 10 to 12. It affects around 3% of the population, and if left untreated can affect cardiovascular function, cause chronic pain, and more. Not all cases of scoliosis get severe enough to need treatment, but when they do, the most common options include bracing, a cast that pushes on the torso to realign the spine, and surgery. Metal screws, bars, and wires inserted into the spine to correct the curvature internally. Typically, bracing is most effective when the patient is growing, and surgery is offered to those with more severe curves and little to no growth left. Bracing is the least invasive, least risky, and least expensive option, but surgery becomes necessary when the curve becomes too severe. The only way to stop it from progressing that far is to catch it and start bracing early in the game. That is why scoliosis screenings are necessary. The screenings themselves are a quick test where the patient will touch their toes, and any sideways curvature or spinal rotation can be seen by the person performing the test. It takes maybe 30 seconds and requires no special equipment. In 2004, the U.S. Preventative Service Task Force stopped mandating these screenings in schools because they were diagnosing so many kids with moderate scoliosis, the type that's treated with bracing. At the time, there was little clinical proof that bracing works, so they felt the screenings were a waste of resources. Well, now, 20 years later, there is plenty of proof that bracing works, and I'm an example of this. In the 7th grade, I was diagnosed with scoliosis by my pediatrician, and in 8th grade, I began bracing. By that point, my curvature was severe, but my parents wanted to try bracing as a last resort. My treatment worked, and I am now out of surgical range. Unfortunately, not all pediatricians perform this screening, and not all students receive regular checkups. Because of this, I believe it's important to provide these screenings for PSD students. I hope you will be willing to work with me to achieve this goal. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next up, we have Jen Casey. Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Jen Casey. I'm a para at Bolts. During my time as a paraprofessional at PSD, I've had the privilege of working alongside many talented individuals. Over the years, I've consistently heard a concern raised within the paraprofessional community: the daily lack of respect we experience. It feels as though there's a hierarchy in our schools, with paraprofessionals often treated at the bottom of the hierarchy. Such treatment is detrimental to morale and is, in general, disheartening. Those of us who choose to become paraprofessionals do so because, like a lot of staff here at school, we are passionate about serving our students. We are committed to their success, whether we are pursuing careers in education, developing our professional skills, or providing essential support to children with special needs. We come from diverse backgrounds: parents, students, community members, and we are all deeply invested in the success of our students and the Fort Collins community as a whole. In addition to the need for dignity and respect, one of the major challenges within the paraprofessional community is retention. Too often, paraprofessionals are seen as easily replaceable. Many staff members assume that building strong working relationships with paraprofessionals is not worth the effort, because at the first opportunity, a para will move on. While mutual respect and kindness are important, the issue of retention is more complex. It's no secret that lower wages and the high cost of benefits often push people to leave the paraprofessional role. We all understand the district's budget constraints, but what's often overlooked is the cost of employee turnover. Replacing paraprofessionals comes with both direct and indirect costs, not to mention the impact on our students, who lose the stability of having familiar, trusted adults in their lives. Students are far more likely to thrive when they have the same adult guiding them year after year. Stability in staffing has a direct effect on the quality of education our students receive. If time permits, let me briefly share a glimpse into my typical day. To ensure I'm prepared for the day and can give my students my best, I arrive between 6:30 and 6:45 a.m. Unfortunately, my badge doesn't allow me to enter the building until 7 a.m., so I'm often left standing outside waiting for someone to let me in. Ironically, students are often already in the building before my badge will let me in. This becomes even more troubling when you consider that across the district, many paraprofessionals have 24-hour access to their school buildings. In summary, I'd like to propose starting a culture of teamwork, collaboration, and mutual respect between all staff members. This culture must begin at the top and be nurtured at all levels of the organization. By fostering such a culture, we can better serve the needs of our students and the entire community. A simple but powerful step in this direction could be granting paraprofessionals extended access to school buildings. This would improve morale and serve as a clear demonstration of how the district values its paraprofessionals. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Caitlin Guzman. Welcome.
Hello, good afternoon, members of the board. My name is Caitlin Guzman, and I am a paraprofessional at Bolts Middle School, and I work in our center-based autism program. I would like to start off on who I am and my key role in Poudre School District. At the age of 16, I decided I wanted to become an educator as a sophomore in high school. I helped my little brother while he was in kindergarten. This struck my interest in becoming an elementary school teacher. My high school in the neighboring district had a program called the Future Educator Program. I was one of the 6 kids in the whole district who were chosen to be a part of this program. In my second year, I decided to leave the neighboring district and come to Poudre as I felt like there was more opportunity for me to grow. As I continue to attend college part-time, work here at Poudre full-time, I have unfortunately needed to get a second job. I currently make $20.63 an hour. I would like to start off with some positives. The reason I stay in education is the relationships I have been able to form, as well as being fortunate enough to have an amazing supervisor and being able to work with early childhood up to middle school in the 3 years I have been in education. Although my older kids show love differently, they are the reason I show up, and I am super lucky to have a team who is more like family. I get paid $20.63 an hour to get hit more than 20 times a day. I get called all kinds of names by students because I prompted them to follow a direction. This school year alone, I've gotten a minor sprain on my right arm, hit so badly in the back of my head that I was sore for 4 to 5 days. A sensory room door that weighed more than 100 pounds was literally broken off the hinges from a student. I believe we should be getting hazard pay. As paraprofessionals in the center-based autism program, we are performing hazardous duties. My coworker last month was covered in a student's blood. I have been spit on consistently by a student who thinks it's funny to do so, as well as any bodily fluid possible with not enough time to prepare for those situations, as well as physical hardship, which has been stated above. Before this school board meeting, I have recounted how many paraprofessional openings we we had in the last month. 11/20, we had 23 paraprofessional openings. Today, 12/10, we have a total of 28 openings in our school district. Let that number sink in. Let's put it this way, 28 classrooms are without paras. No help with redirection, no help with elopement, no help with behavior management, one less body in the classroom. But this ties back to a lot of people for pay. The reason why I became a para was because this is the first step in education for me. The sense of being able to make a difference in a community, as I grew up in California in a low-income community, with some amazing teachers who never gave up on me. I now have a voice and I will use it. We need better pay now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all of those who came tonight to speak. Really appreciate it. We are now going to move on to board topics and committee reports. This agenda item is an opportunity for board members to provide an update on committee work or speak to board topics. Do any board members have anything they would like to report? Okay. I will just let everybody know that starting in January, we'll be having monthly community engagement sessions with the board. So I'll be looking for that. We will be setting dates within the next few weeks, and we will be doing those on a monthly basis. So,
Kristen, can I jump in?
You sure can, Kevin. Yeah.
I'm sorry. That was the one. That was one of the things I wanted to.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't even see your hand raised there, Kevin.
You're all right. And I'm, for whatever reason, I'm not. My camera's not working.
Yeah,
so
I didn't see it. Yeah.
No, you're fine. Again, I wanted to thank Chief of Staff Lauren Hooten for arranging me to participate today, as well as PSD staff. I'm sorry I'm not physically there. As you can hear, I'm sounding and feeling pretty rough today. I didn't want to share my germs with our community, but still wanted to be there because we've got some really important conversations and really important and exciting things ahead of us on our agenda. The first one I wanted to announce is that Superintendent Kingsley and I have been invited to attend a podcast called Selling Fort Collins. We will be recording a week from this past Monday, so 12/16. And this is with Greg Rader, who's an incredible realtor in town, but also is doing a deep dive into all Fort Collins. And so Senator Kingsley has already appeared on this podcast. So you can access that via Spotify, YouTube. If you Google Selling Fort Collins, it'll pop up. So I wanted to just make that quick announcement. We'll be talking about some exciting things down the road for PSD this year and next. And then also I did want to jump in on the opportunity. Thank you, President Draper, to mention I'll be working with the other directors as well as our community and staff to try to launch. I understand there were engagement sessions prior to the pandemic where our community could meet with PSD directors. My vision is for this to be very informal, no agenda, but having a set time where community members can engage directly with board directors, either in 2s, 3s, or as many as are available. We're working on what day of the week would make the most sense for everybody. Right now it's sort of in the incubator stage, but we're thinking it makes sense to host these at schools and then have different schools host once a month. That way we can also showcase some of the great things that are going on within our schools. But a lot of our community are going to already be there, right? They'll already be in schools, so it'll be easier for them. I'm going to work up a preliminary budget, so we can offer some food. One thought was to have pies with the directors. So we'll see what our pizza budget may be, and if people are sick of pizza, then we'll look at other options. But the point is, get our community directly in front of our directors and to talk all things PSD. That way we can open that dialogue again in another avenue. We can talk about things that may appear on our agenda or that we may want to put on our agenda direct from community feedback. So it's just another avenue other than community comment where our folks can express their opinions and what they want to see happen, what we're doing well, what we can change. So I appreciate you announcing that. We'll put a lot of thought into that. And if our community has any thoughts about best to structure that logistically, if they got ideas for childcare, if they've got ideas for food and venues, I'm all ears. So please email me at khavelda@psdschools.org. And that's all I've got. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. I will move on to the consent agenda. Would any board member like to pull an item from consent? Okay. Kevin, is that hand up for consent or is that left over? There we go. Thank you. Just wanted to make sure. So seeing none, can I get a motion?
Sure, I move the board approve and adopt the recommended actions for the items on the consent agenda.
Can I get a second? Thank you, Jess. And then Jill, can you call the vote?
Jim Brokish,
Aye.
Kristen Draper,
Aye.
Connor Duffy,
Aye.
Kevin Havelda,
Aye.
Carolyn Reed,
Aye.
Scott Schoenbauer,
Aye.
Jessica Zamora.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. All right, and we'll move on to 9.0 action items. 9.1 monitoring policy review, EL 2.3 financial conditions and activities. Can I get a motion? Jess, you got it? Oh, looks like Connor has it.
I move that the board determine that the superintendent has reasonably interpreted Board of Education Policy EL 2.3 in his internal monitoring report dated 12/10/24, and that the evidence presented supports the superintendent's conclusion stated in the internal monitoring report.
Can I get a second? All right, thanks, Jim. All right. And are there any questions regarding this? Okay. All right, so Jill, can we call the vote?
Jim Brokish,
Aye.
Kristen Draper,
Aye.
Connor Duffy,
Aye.
Kevin Havelda,
Aye.
Carolyn Reed,
Aye.
Scott Schoenbauer,
Aye.
Jessica Zamora.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. All right, moving on to informational reports and discussion items. 10.1, district annual budget process priorities and update. And I believe we have a guest for this.
Yes, we do. Providing an update tonight on the district annual budget process is our budget director, Brian Gustafson. Brian, welcome.
All right, thank you. Thank you for having me. Good to see you all again. Unbelievably, we're wrapping up semester one and a calendar year and halfway through our current fiscal year. I'm going to take just a few moments, talk about where we are in our current budget process as well as for this year, but as well as our planning and start of the budget process for next year. Of course, I'll be piggybacking on some of the comments that Superintendent Kingsley made earlier, and you'll hear some of those same items come up as we get into some of the challenges and some of the things that we see on the horizon for fiscal year 26. So as we think about building the budget, we must consider and keep grounded in the alignment to the strategic plan priorities of literacy, mental health and belonging, and graduating with options. Additionally, the priorities of evaluating enrollment trends, addressing safety, and focusing on competitive compensation and benefits, carry over currently from the current fiscal year into the next as budget priorities, right? So these things will be focused on and will be addressed as we go through the budget planning for fiscal year 26. On top of that, and especially in light of the new debt-free mill levy, we want to make sure that we highlight additional budgetary items of ensuring high-quality education options for our students and families here, a continued stewardship of taxpayer dollars and community assets like our facilities, equipment, locations, et cetera. And then, of course, maintenance and improvement of learning environments to facilitate quality instruction. Okay, so all of these priorities are at the forefront as we get started into this budget process. Okay, so let's talk about the process a little bit. And I won't have a lot of numbers for you, just some really high-level initial information that was already addressed a little bit earlier. Hey, the process really starts for the next fiscal year in November of this fall, where the governor rolls out his budget request with the state of Colorado. Okay, and in that budget request for K-12 education, we see a total program increase of about $299 per pupil funding. Okay, that is built basically on a rate of inflation assumed to be 2.5%. As a point of perspective, this year's rate of inflation that funded or built the formula was based at 5.2%. Okay, so a pretty significant decrease in that per pupil increase of $299. Hey, now I know the question that will be coming is, well, what does that mean for PSD? How much more money? And the answer is, I don't know. And here's the why. Really, as you know, as we talked about a lot in the fall, we've got the two big factors, the per pupil rate and the number of pupils. Hey, we still have a lot of navigation to do to get that established number of pupils dialed into where we can really make a good estimate. And there's some other variables I'm going to address that make a projection of what dollars we'd be looking at possible. Additionally, and this was mentioned earlier, in that budget request, there's the elimination of pupil count averaging. And this is not only in the current school finance formula, but in the new one that goes into effect next year. And that's going to be a really interesting dynamic, I think, as we get into the legislative session starting up in January. On top of that, an extension of that new formula implementation from 6 years to 7 will be something that it's hard to know the impacts of, but we'll have to monitor and see what does that really mean? What does that extended runway really do to start this new school finance formula? Hey, so on top of those items in the governor's budget request for the total program increase, that request also included addressing categorical programs. Remember, those are things like transportation funding, special education funding, assuming a 2.5% inflation increase in those funding streams as well. Okay. So we've seen basically the real high level. What we have not seen yet are any what we would call runs, okay? Any really significant detailed runs. We've seen some guesstimates on what this might mean, but really we typically see in late December or as we get into January, CDE produce some more detailed information that puts some numbers behind this information. And really what they're waiting on is that final certification of this year's October count and then plugging it into the formula as a new basis on which the formula should operate. Okay, so with that in mind, what are we doing as far as our process? Where are we in our efforts to get started here? And really, once you think about a 4-lane process, we've got multiple processes actually already started and going at one time. And one of them being the student-based budgeting process. And we've talked about student-based budgeting, or SBB, a lot in the past. And this process is already underway, and I'm going to show you a couple visuals to remind us kind of where we're at there. But that's already going as far as wrapping up this year, but even some thoughts getting ready for next year. Additionally, and in kind of a different lane, is our departmental process for budgeting. This is where our academic and our operational departments are starting to do work in analyzing their current budgets, their current staffing, their current goals, and then thinking about next year and how their budgets might look or need to look with some of the goals that they have. On top of that, we're engaging in some budget review processes, okay, utilizing some of the community or the committees and community members in the district to engage in reviews of our budget and processes, including the Budget Advisory Committee, which I'll talk about, and the District Accountability Committee, as well as the Budget Design Team. And then, of course, there's another lane. That's, of course, the Board of Education, okay, reviewing and providing input on budget priorities, and as well as going through the process of feedback, analyzing budget presentations, budgets throughout the year, and ultimately providing adoption for a budget at the end of June. So we'll look at that first lane, that SBB lane, and this is a slide we used back in October, just a quick refresher here on that SBB cycle. And we're right at the top of that circular cycle, the box at the top that says December 2024 FY25 true-ups. Okay, right now, we're in the process of collecting the current year's October count information. And as you heard earlier, we're just getting final numbers, even as early as this afternoon, to really dial in and plug into our formula to know how we must adjust funding at the schools for this year based on their enrollments. So we're in that process right now, and we hope to have those true-ups, the adjustments to school budgets, done next week. So fingers crossed we can have that accomplished and we're finalized with our data there. Then we'll jump right into looking at next year when we get into January, and we receive some enrollment projections by the end of January on what enrollments will look like at our schools for fiscal year 26. And I know our data team is working feverishly behind the scenes to not only wrap up this year, but think about those projections moving forward, because I know that that's really a huge part of the equation that we have to know so we can start putting a number to that question of what does it mean for PSD. Okay, in February, then with those numbers, we'll roll out allocations for next year by Valentine's Day. Okay, February 14th, okay, we'll get a little Valentine to each principal that'll say, okay, here's your allocation. And then they will have 2 weeks to start to build their comp plan, or their plan for how they will build their staffing, their operational spending throughout their building. They'll work with their stakeholders to do that and provide a comp plan by the end of February. Okay, then those will be reviewed in early March, and hopefully all wrapped up probably by about mid-March with approvals. And really at that point then, the budgets are allocated to the schools, and then staffing can be filled in. Principals can work on their staffing plans around those budgets. On the screen is just a little different way to look at that cycle. So we have a graphic here where at the top left, we've got those two large components, enrollment projections and the school finance formula. Right now, we have a okay idea of that school finance formula, and we're still waiting for those enrollment projections to really start this flow for next year's student-based budgeting allocations. Those two items together will lead to, of course, dollars, as I mentioned, that flow to the schools. The schools will work with their accountability committees, their stakeholders, to build their local priorities, and then build those comp plans that I discussed. I think also important to note is that as this process takes shape, that the schools will be analyzing how they wrap up this year, right? Because they're going to also be planning on what are their needs that are ongoing this year to get into next year's budget, what sort of reserves are they able to carry over to help with implementing, whether it be remaining programs, one-time programs, et cetera, as they get into next year. Hey, going to that lane 2 that I talked about, where are we at with starting in on departmental budgeting? Hey, and this has already commenced as well here this fall. Our departments are now taking some time to get with each other and analyze their staffing. And they're going through their staffing rosters, they're going through and rebuilding or reaffirming their organizational charts. And so they're submitting those and also considering what are their objectives for deploying their budget within their department, right? How does that budget benefit the school district and educating students here? So departments are currently working on those, and we're collecting those, and we'll then also have our departments start diving into their financial data here after the start of the new calendar year. Analyzing their spend, looking at their budgets from the past, considering their needs and upcoming priorities for the future, and really trying to take a look at, how could those things change, maybe in a perfect world, but also in the realistic kind of environment that we face ourselves with in Colorado school finance. Okay, as departments compile this information, we're engaging our budget advisory committee a little bit differently than we have in the past. And I'll talk a little bit more about that group. But this group will then have some eyes on this stuff. And again, I'm going to talk a little bit about that group right now. Okay, the Budget Advisory Committee is a group of folks, it's a smaller group than some of our other committees, that's made up of internal and external stakeholders. Okay, the charge of this crew is to review some of this district fiscal information, but this group just met for the first time last Friday. And I want to share with you really the focus that we came away with out of that meeting. Okay, the BAC has identified a focus on building shared understanding of the budget process to ensure transparent alignment with strategic objectives while keeping the budgetary focus on what's best for students. Okay, so this group will add another set of eyes on our budget processes coming out of departments and potentially schools. Hey, looking at those objectives, looking at expenditures, looking at budgets, surfacing questions, maybe wonderings, asking for additional information if possible, or maybe even helping to highlight areas of need and consider redundancies and inefficiencies. So this is a small group adding another layer to really build that shared understanding. And honestly, personally, I came away from that meeting Friday energized about that with this group of folks. A pretty common understanding of wanting to do this together was really, really refreshing and exciting for what we can do in the future. So that Budget Advisory Committee is one of a number of groups that will be providing input on the budget throughout this process. I already mentioned departments are going to be providing input, the BAC providing input, and the District Accountability Committee has already provided some input on the budget process and what the needs of the district should consider. So these groups together all will be generating some information. Maybe it's recommendations, maybe it's some thoughts, additional questions, and that will be forwarded on to our budget design team. That's a little bit larger group, an internal group, that will then consider budget recommendations, possibly, that they can forward on to our cabinet, to the negotiation cycle, to the Board of Education. So we've got some flow going here, got some different avenues to take a look at things, provide some insight on. That district budget design team is made up of licensed, classified, and administrative staff, and typically gets engaged about this time of the year. We're going to start them probably a little bit later so that these other processes can get some stuff rolling for this group to start to evaluate and listen to and take a look at as we get to the end of January into February. So you've already had a little bit of insight into what are some of the challenges that lie ahead. We've talked many times about enrollment trends here. Earlier, you heard this year down 441 students from the year prior. And that's significant, obviously, in that big equation. We're awaiting what are the new projections like based on, kind of start this year as a new normal. Where do we end up looking at for next year and then 3 to 4 years beyond that? So anxiously, awaiting seeing some of that information. We talked a little bit about the implementation of a new school finance formula. What does that extended implementation of going from 6 years to 7 years mean? And what does this elimination of averaging mean? Now, as mentioned earlier, really what it means, and I'll editorialize a little bit, is a budget stabilization factor in a different, really in a different name. We'll hear a lot in this legislative session that there's no budget stabilization factor. Well, elimination of averaging, regardless of which formula we're talking about, does free up resources to the state of Colorado from $190 million to maybe $200 million or more dollars. So it's just, again, an editorialization, but it's a same mechanism, different name kind of thing. Now, I do also think that the legislative session will look a little differently when it comes to the discussions of the governor's budget requests this year. The last couple of years, what we've seen is the governor rolls out a request. We have a lot of talk, a lot of things happen for 4 or 5 months, and then it's kind of always settled back pretty close to that request. My guess, and certainly it's just a guess right now, my guess is this might be a little different. I think these are topics that are going to generate significant conversation and maybe have a lot of other opinions and constituents weigh in heavily on when it comes to things like, especially that averaging. There are large districts, there are many districts that would be impacted significantly by changes in that mechanism of the formula. For us, that might mean $1 million. For other districts, it might be tens of millions of dollars. So that is going to be really interesting to not only watch and listen to, but see how it impacts the process and how long it's going to take for us to have some answers here. On top of everything else, we have the challenges of really fewer statewide resources for ongoing programs. An example is the Healthy Meals for All program, an extremely popular one that's relatively new, providing healthy meals to all the kids in schools. And what the state of Colorado has found, that it's so popular that it's become tremendously expensive. Okay? And now we have to find dollars to fund it. Okay? That's just one example. Okay? Even other pressures that can be exerted on the state budget, things like corrections, think transportation, law enforcement, whenever there are other pushes and pressures on the state budget, K-12 is impacted, because just like our budget, there's a finite amount. And the more demands there are, the more it gets spread out. Other parts of the budget have to make sacrifices. So we'll have to monitor those as well. It's going to be a busy, I think, winter when it comes to the state of Colorado budget. This is not an easy slide to read, certainly this timeline, but it's in your packets for you to review, a draft timeline of the budget process. Really, if I were to summarize it, I would excuse me, address the things we've already hit on. That student-based budget true-up based on the October count, ongoing now. We will revise our district budget in January for approval by the board at the end of January, and there will be some significant revisions this year. We're adding an extremely large local revenue source, which is incredible. Okay? And we're going to build a new fund that will be in the budget to house that debt-free mill levy. And in doing so, there will be changes to the general fund. And so all of that will be in a revised budget in January for you all to review. On top of that, we'll also have finalized October count impacts on our revenue, so that will be reflected as well. I already talked about the SBB cycle for next year. That'll be out to schools by February 14th, and we await multi-year projections for district enrollment a little later in the winter and spring so that we can continue to do our modeling to the best detail that we can. All right, with that, open it up for some questions.
Thank you so much, Brian. That was great. And I know that it means having to make some changes in January, but I feel like, once again, it's we have to send our appreciation to the voters for giving us this problem of having to make changes in January. It's a really good problem to have.
Yeah.
So we're thrilled with that. So once again, to the voters, just a huge thank you. This is going to make everything that much easier. I also just want to highlight the fact that we are still talking about, unfortunately, we are not funded to where we need to be, and looking at close to $1 million in cuts next year, with the possibility of this renamed or reallocated BS factor, whatever you want to call it, with a lack of averaging. That is something that we need to be aware of and be concerned with. And I think our voters need to be aware of that as well, that this is something that, as a school district and school districts throughout Colorado, have to deal with, that these things are fluctuating, and we are at the mercy of the governors and the governor and the legislative, and the fact that we have, our taxes are finite, the money that we're working with is finite. So I just wanted to, just reiterate all of that.
We do have an interesting circumstance in front of us, a good challenge in how to deploy a new local revenue stream.
Yes.
A significant one, make significant impacts on the district, but also deal with the potential of a state revenue stream that may not generate any new revenue, potentially. And so with a low inflation rate driving the per pupil rate, depending what our enrollment trends are, we're going to have to balance those two things. It's going to be interesting.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for your work on this.
Thank you.
Anyone have any questions? Yeah, Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Can you give me the justification that the governor has for getting rid of averaging? Like, what's the argument for that? I know the sense in the room is it's a negative. I think it is a negative for us for sure. I just don't understand what the positive is.
The only insight I have is listening to one of the members of the state budget and planning group that basically said we have to find a way to right size things more quickly, as far as the K-12 budget and not funding students that are no longer in classrooms to address other demands on the state budget. And that's me paraphrasing from a presentation I heard a number of weeks ago.
Other questions? Jim, did you have something?
Just, I was wondering, do you know, follow on to Scott's question, do you know if other states do this kind of averaging? I thought I read something that maybe they didn't. Do you know?
It is all over the place.
Okay.
And I have an interesting article that maybe we can forward and it can get to you all from Moody's, who does credit ratings on especially school credit and bond issues. And it's really interesting in that it addresses the same issues that we experience here. It's almost like reading about Poudre School District, but it's a nationwide approach. And it's variable school finance formulas that some have averaging, some don't, and it's all over the place. Challenges with declining enrollments, challenges with cost of living, and it's like check, 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 that state after state after state is wrestling with in funding schools.
Other questions? Go ahead, Scott.
Another question, the 441, the decrease in enrollment, how close, like we're talking about, we'll be doing projections in this budget for 25, 26. How close was that number to the projection for 24, 25?
Really preliminarily, and I need to see it plugged into the average, but I think as far as the number of students projected to be in our schools, we came in about 65 higher than the projection, somewhere right in there. So that's pretty dang close.
Other questions? Okay. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Yeah. Okay, we will move on to 10.2, Summer 2025 Mill Levy Projects Update, which is very exciting.
Yeah, sure is. Thank you for the transition here. So tonight we look forward to hearing an update on the Summer 2025 Mill Levies projects from our CFO, Dave Montoya. Dave, welcome.
Thank you. And yes, this is a very exciting topic to be talking about. Tonight we're going to start talking, one of the things that we were talking in the cabinet about is that there's going to be a lot coming at you as a board in the next couple of months, especially as we gear up for any projects that we think we can accomplish 2025, as well as projects that we're going to start really diving into in preparation for 2026. So really there's no action tonight. What we wanted to do is just kind of give you an idea of what might be coming at you. There will be plenty of opportunity to ask questions about these things as they develop over the next couple of months. So the first thing is just kind of grounding us into why we're having this conversation. We've talked about it a lot tonight. We want to thank our local voters. The $49 million override that is the debt-free mill levy override will be a drastic change to how we're doing business in the district. So we're really excited about that. And when we think about that mill levy override, we're really focusing on a number of things: recruitment, retention, school maintenance, classroom resources, and neighborhood schools. So tonight I'm going to focus more on the school maintenance side and some of the things that may be coming at you in short order in the next couple months. As we dive into these projects, I need to qualify a couple of things. One is we are going at these projects with all intention of trying to get as many of them done this summer as we can. I also want to ground us in the reality that we're going to have some things that may be at odds at us being able to accomplish that this summer. Things like lead times are real, and so we're going to need to look at equipment. The other thing that really is the only barrier that we're seeing right now is the permitting phase and getting through permits at the state level. And we're going to try to get in early, but as I think many of you are aware, there were a number of elections that passed across the state, and so we expect that those state permits are going to start to populate quickly, and so we may have to reorganize our timing on some of these based on those two things. But really what we did is, in kind of thinking about having some swift action, this year, this summer is a little unique in the fact that we needed to wait until we knew what the results of the election were before we could really go forward with some serious detailed planning and start spending some money on this. What that did is it created a very short window on things that we can get accomplished this summer because of all these things that I've been talking about. So we weren't just sitting idly by waiting for the election. We actually started looking at this earlier than the election to prepare for that. And we did identify a number of projects that we felt that could be accomplishable in this short window this first year. Understanding that we had to wait until November to get an answer, and we've got a very short runway up to summer of '25. To be able to do this, and again, why we're here tonight is there's going to be potentially a lot of things coming at you in your board packets. You may see contracts for design, you may see contracts for contractors. We wanted to kind of give you a heads up about that so that we don't get bogged down in that, because we will need to keep moving if we're gonna stay on these timelines. So just kind of a little brief background, and the slide's a little busy, I apologize for that, but I just wanted to ground us in kind of how we got to where we are, at least for this first stage of the planning. The first one is just some background. We partnered with McKinstry. We talked a lot about this during the election. And we really started with that data set, the facility condition assessments that they did. We took that data further, and our facilities team actually expanded on the initial database. We added other categories that McKinstry did not include, like outdoor services, playgrounds, athletics. So those were some enhancements that we made to that data. And then using this data, as well as historical maintenance data, we teamed up with the entire operations department, so not just project people, but also the people in the trades. And we talked about what are the things that need to be funded first, like what are the priorities. And in fact, I don't have it, it's on my desk, but there was a list that's on the website that has the 5-year priorities as we outlined them for the election. And many of these projects come right off of that list. So that's where that came from. As we think about how we prioritize this, always safety and security is a high priority for us. And this is a good time to maybe take a pause to say, there's also a lot of projects that aren't in this presentation that already started, like last year. We started a lot of door projects for safety, and so we're going to be continuing to finish those up this summer of '25. What I'm really talking to you about is these new projects that we're talking about. But safety and security is always going to be at the top of what we're looking at. Deferred and preventative maintenance was a very important thing about the election. That's what we were trying to accomplish, so that was one of our priorities, as well as student and staff comfort, and energy and sustainability is something that we also want to be keeping track of. What we did is we used some strategies to look for cost and labor efficiencies by combining similar trades. So McKinstry took a very holistic approach to how they created their database, and it's very focused on asset, that kind of approach. But as you start really diving into it, and we really started dipping our toes into that for the summer of '25, what I'm really excited about is coming back after the break and doing some really intensive planning around looking at projects that we can bundle together to get efficiencies. And so that's one of the things that we tried to do, is we tried to identify where is there opportunity for us to combine some things to actually move forward in a quicker way. We are also trying to consider our subcontractor market, concerned about oversaturation in certain categories. It's not starting to materialize yet, but something we need to pay attention to. And then we also need to think about system improvements, technology upgrades, whenever it's beneficial to do that. So those were some strategies that we used. Using those strategies, and again, there's a clear delineation between what I'm going to show you on the next couple slides and what's going to happen probably starting summer of '26. Because of the short runway, what we did is we identified projects that we thought we could get accomplished. Now, are we going to get them all accomplished this summer? Probably not, but we have a good opportunity to accomplish the majority of them, depending on lead times and things. But what we're going to need to be cautious of is that as we start getting documents in, lead times, we get designs closer, we're going to really know where these projects are going to fall. Our goal is to try to get as many of them done this summer as we possibly can. So let's look at some of the categories that we've identified as far as things that we want to accomplish this summer if we can, but in reality, some of these may end up having to move to summer of '26 because of lead times and other things like that as we get equipment. The big one, and we've already kind of talked about this, Superintendent Kingsley talked about this in his remarks. We are looking at rooftop units, 8 air conditioning and boiler projects. This is a big category for us in this function. And this is a great opportunity of what I was describing earlier around identifying where we have opportunities to do things at the same time. And so one of the things that we had already planned on doing was some work with Beatty and their rooftop units. Okay, not air conditioning, but we knew the rooftop units were failing. So once we knew the answer from 4A, we quickly pivoted and said, what would it look like to actually install air conditioning in those units instead of a like-for-like type of replacement? And so that's just one example of, for both Beatty and O'Day, where we've actually identified 2 schools that we think we could get done pretty quickly. What we're going to need to do is come back after the break and do the detailed planning for the rest of the 5 and 10-year plan. But these are the ones that really filtered up to the understanding that we think we might be able to accomplish them. Now, I'm also going to pause because those first 2 projects, the air conditioning rooftop units, those are extremely big projects. And these are the ones that I'm alluding to that we're concerned about lead times. So we've already started talking to designers, thinking about this. We are going to be looking at how we can get some electrical components, but that might be the barrier for us, is some of these electrical components that we might not be able to get. So we will get ready, and you've already approved an amendment to the design contract for us to really start robustly diving into Beatty and seeing what that's going to look like. We also have some boiler replacements in here. One of them is the first one on the list there, Fort Collins High School, is actually a boiler that went down this year. And so that is a replacement of something that failed. We are also going to be looking at boiler replacements at Bolts, Cruz, and Laurel. We've got a number of roofing projects that we're going to try to accomplish. Poudre High School is another big project. And that one, we're going to start as much of it as we can this summer. If we can get a large amount of it done, we will. But usually a roof of this size may have to be phased over a couple of years. And so we'll work with our designers, and that's what we're going to start working on, is how is this going to work? How can we phase these things in? We're also looking at roofs at Harris, PCA, Irish, and Shepherdson. We also in this grouping have identified fire alarm systems. I won't read through all these schools, but we have identified a number of fire alarm systems that need to be upgraded. So you can see those schools, as well as a building automation system at Fort Collins High School. That's a very large project as well. And it'll couple well with the boiler replacement that we're going to be doing there at the same time. And then I guess I want to call attention to that bottom thing on the slide there. All these costs are very rudimentary. They're based on historical, what we think internally they may be. The reality is once we get the designers on staff and really start getting into the projects, we're going to need to refine those. They will drift quite a bit up and down depending on what those designs look like. But I just wanted to put some numbers behind this, but just understand those numbers will change as we go through the design process and get closer to contracts. Other projects that we have slated, carpeting and flooring projects, we've got a couple of those. We've got a parking lot project that we think we can accomplish in this short window, as well as potentially looking at replacing track and field replacement at French Field. That's something that's been overdue and something that we need to do. And then there's a number of playground projects that we want to accomplish if we can across the district. And again, same caveat on all these. These are rudimentary costs. As we go forward and bring contracts forward, we'll understand what those costs are better. These are just a sampling of some of the projects that we're going to be doing. There's also a large number of smaller things that we're going to be doing that I didn't want to go through a laundry list tonight, but these were the ones I thought were relevant and would be of interest to the board. Coming back to a little bit about our process and why we're talking tonight is this really starts with a project need. Whenever we're thinking about doing a project, there's a need. And then this is a fairly normal process here. You enter in a design phase, and that's what we, like for the Beatty one, that's the change that we did tonight. We're going to go in and really start designing that air conditioning unit in the hopes of getting that permitting started early. Okay, so that's why we want to get going on design, so we can get ahead of permitting. Once we get past the design, then we enter into procurement, and we go out and we select contractors to do the work. Typically, if those are over $250,000, we'll ask the board for approval. Not typically, we were required to do that. And then once the board approval is done, then we can enter into the actual construction phase and actually do the work. And just recently, the board approved a project for the Futures Lab up at the for the advanced manufacturing, and that's a good example of kind of how this process works. Okay. And just a reminder, because these things are going to be coming on your board agendas. We do conduct formal solicitations. So formal means that we actually post it on BidNet and go through a fairly lengthy process. We do conduct formal solicitations on all contracts or projects over $50,000. The board will be required for any contract over $250,000 to approve those. So we bring those to the board for approval. Just giving you a heads up on one of the exceptions that you're going to be seeing, and as we reviewed the projects, there's not many exceptions, but the one that we do see is that there is standardization for our building and automation system. So that's something we won't go out and necessarily get solicitations on, because we've chosen at a point in time that we're going to use Long Building Technologies as our building automation system. And it's important for us to have the same system across the district. So we did some work way back when where we selected them, and we're just staying with Long. And that's just a heads up that sometimes those things happen. But for the most part, you're gonna see a normal a contract request where we'll describe the procurement that we did. We'll describe how we selected the vendor, why we selected the vendor, things of that nature. So next steps, there's gonna be a large volume of things coming on your agenda. That's a great thing. We're really excited about it, and it's going to do some great things. As we look at some of those lists that we just visited, those are things that we would not even be contemplating right now, other than maybe replacing that boiler and doing a roof or something that we absolutely had to do. 4A has changed how we're going to do business in this district. So be ready. There's going to be a lot coming at you probably through January through April. And again, we're gonna try our best to get as much of this done summer of 2025. I don't want to overpromise though, because there will be things that have to slip to the next year. That's not meaning that we're not doing the project. It just means that we had to slide it a little bit, but we're moving full steam ahead on these. The timeline that we have is aggressive. This window between the election and the summer is a very short window. We will not let that window impede us next time. We're going to start planning for summer 26. As I said, January of 25 when we come back after break, so that we have a really nice window of getting more runway so that we can be more nimble around what projects we're bringing. So the ones we brought are the ones that we think we can do, but it is aggressive. We may not be able to get it to everything this summer. Yeah, and then I already took my other bullet point because I wanted to reinforce that multiple times tonight. So that's kind of where the presentation ends. I don't have a question slide, but I can take any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Dave. I think this is amazingly exciting, and what you've laid out for us is truly aggressive and impressive. And if we can get, the majority of it done, that'll be absolutely amazing. And I know that our staff will appreciate that, whether it's air conditioning in the rooms or doors that, are functioning the way they should be, or anything like that. So once again, to the voters, I just need to say thank you so much, because this is the reason it's happening, because you approved this and you trusted PSD to make these improvements, and we are hitting the ground running on this.
Yep.
I do have one question for you, and that is it possible to be looking at some of these things have to happen during the school year? I know that, big projects like a roofing and air conditioning unit, probably not, but is there something that we can be looking at throughout the school year? And to that end, is there any possibility of using swing spaces to, maybe do a bigger project in a building for 3 months, or something to that effect?
Yeah. So projects during the year, we typically have shied away from those historically, but I think we've got an example up the hill that's actually taking place right now. So I do think that that's something that we can explore. More possibly, I think. We'll also be exploring any of those creative ideas, I think, when we come back after the break around, is there shifting that can happen, or can we do projects during the school year? Given the short runway for this summer, that was not achievable, but that's exactly the next level of planning that I'm really excited about getting into, because like it was like we wanted to get what we could done this year, but I'm really excited about setting the stage for that detailed planning on how are we going to approach those things. And there's all sorts of new ways to look at this, and I think that, you know, I've got Alex here with me. We're excited about maybe thinking about things differently where it makes sense.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Are there other questions? Yeah, Jess, go ahead.
Do we have a sense of there being any supply chain issues? I mean, that was a huge problem in the past. Has that gotten any better, or?
Yeah. When I was mentioning lead times, that's exactly what I'm talking about, is supply chain issues. And for example, the air conditioning projects require a lot of electrical upgrades, and so we're not necessarily having a tough time sourcing the units. Potentially, it's some of the other components that may hold us up. And so, again, we're being creative. We're talking about, is there other ways to do that? And having the designers on board now, and it's good that we were able to move forward with some of these things after the approval tonight, because then we can actually really start diving into that and seeing, is there opportunity.
Thanks, Dave. This is absolutely exciting to see, and I think there's going to be a lot of happy people come the start of next year. I'm thinking these are the big projects. I've gotten feedback that there's a lot of small projects at a lot of schools that have kind of the work tickets have added up.
Yeah.
And some of those I feel like could be potentially done during the school year. When contractors may be looking for work during the winter months, interior stuff. I think you're saying that's your next look, is those smaller projects, but I'd like to get some of those low-hanging fruit things touching other schools that maybe not on this list, so everybody feels like, hey, something's happening, action's being taken with these new dollars.
I think that's a really good point to make, and I want to call attention to something that's also happening that I wasn't thinking about bringing up, but I think it's really good for you to know. We've convened a group of principals and staff to actually review our project proposal process, because what you just described of projects out there in the system, some have been around for a long time, some are not documented well. And so what we're talking about is with 4A, there's a great opportunity to do a grand reset, to say, what are those projects? So yes, we will be looking at those, but I want to establish a good process by which we bring those in and vet those before we just start cranking through them. But that is the important part. That is another layer of importance to this work.
Sorry, Jess, did you have one? Connor?
Dave, I think that first and foremost, this is great. Super excited about getting a lot of this stuff. Right now we have, a plethora of projects to get through. And I'm not too worried about any of them moving up in priority or moving down as money becomes available. But in the longer term, one of the concerns that I have is, and maybe even near-term concern, if we can't get to these projects this year, what's our process on the capital carryover until the next year? So if we don't allocate all the capital this year, a project gets delayed, we have supply chain issues, what's the process for our carryover for that capital?
What we're still doing is that we would dedicate, once we identify the project and we identified what the costs are typically with a contract, we would establish a budget for that, and then that budget would move forward into the next fiscal year as needed. Now, everything in the debt-free schools levy will need to stay in the debt-free schools levy because it's going to be a separate fund. So any carryover is going to stay in that category. It just moves to the next year. So I think it's just a matter of managing it and making sure we understand how things are moving from year to year. But all the carryover will stay and live within that category of projects. Okay. Go ahead.
And then to follow up on that, if If we sanction a project, so let's say we do phase 1, 2, and 3, at the end of phase 3, we have financial investment decision, the board approves it, that project is sanctioned, that money will carry over to whatever the execution timeframe is.
Yeah.
In the individual fiscal year when those budgets get moved, do you envision any of the projects that are kind of like on our bench or, kind of, there is a need, do you see those moving up, or we would keep those in the same capital allocation process?
I kind of lost the last part of your question there. Can you repeat that again?
So if we have a project this year,
Yep.
2025,
Exactly.
can't get to it, but we have a need for.
For something else.
For something else.
Yes.
Do you envision a
We-
process where we say, hey, these are our bench projects that we'd really like to
Absolutely.
get to and we think we could execute? Is that in?
Yeah,
what
so
you guys are
what you're
envisioning?
talking about is being able to be fluid with, okay, this one has to move here, but can we fill in some things there? Yeah, absolutely, I think we can do that, and that's what we want to do. And that's that detailed planning that I'm talking about when we come back after break, to know which things move and fit where they can. But yeah, that's part of this, is that there's going to be times where, okay, we couldn't get to that this summer because we thought we did. It's going to move to the next summer, but we don't want to lose the opportunity to do things in that moment. So we'll try to have the bench, so to speak, already lined up with projects ready to go, and that way we can pepper them in when we need to. A lot of planning that still needs to happen, so everything I'm talking about, this detailed planning, like we've got a good 5 and 10-year plan, we've talked about that, but the implementation on how we go about that there's a lot more to that.
Other questions? Okay, go ahead, Jasmine.
So obviously we love all of this, and I don't imagine there's a lot of folks that are listening in our meetings, but they would love to hear the things that we're doing. Do we have a place that the projects that are happening or have happened where that list will live so that people can access it and just feel good about where their tax dollars are going?
Yeah, so I would imagine, just like many other bonds or mill levies that we've had, we will stand up something on the website that will talk about that. We'll work with communications to do that, but we have a history of being fairly robust around that, because our voters do want to see what we're doing with the money, and they do pay attention.
Other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
So a comment and just a follow-up to Dave's last statement, I really appreciate that question. We're going to need to communicate those promises made everywhere.
Yep.
From the dais, from our social media, from our website, in our community engagement sessions. I just think we need to continue as a governance team holding each other accountable to being in the know around the status of each of those projects, pictures and celebrations and ribbons to be cut. So I look forward to that. As we close out this particular presentation and pivot to the next one, I want to commend Dave and the operations and the finance team who have been working in partnership for the last 6 months on some significant design work to be able, as a result of a successful ballot measure, we're able to hit the ground running. There are a lot of districts that may have had across the state a successful measure that are just starting design work now. And I think your preemptive nature to get ahead of that positions our district quite well, not just to engage the workforce thoughtfully, but to be more responsive to our voters. So I just want to say thank you, and if you could please extend that gratitude on behalf of the entire governance team to the broader teams that you lead, I would greatly appreciate that.
Yeah, I want to echo that, and I just want to say thank you for all the hard work that you've already put into it. Please rest up, because it looks like you got a lot of work ahead of you too. So I hope you take the next few weeks to just sort of, appreciate and the work that you have already done.
We're already going.
You're already running.
No rest for the weary.
No. Well, it's been fantastic. Do take some deep breaths, and we will see you back here for more. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you to the voters again.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. So we will go ahead and actually, does anybody need a break before we have one last, I want to know if we want to go through or push through or take 5? Okay. Yeah, let's go ahead and take 5 minutes. So it is 8:35 p.m. We will be back here at, we'll call it 8:40.
Check.
8:42 p.m. on Tuesday, December 10th. And we will be moving on with 10.3 update on district committees.
Yes, thank you. So presenting an update on our district committees this evening is Dr. Jody Rommel, our Director of Integrated Services. She's joined by Barb Meringue, who leads our parent outreach efforts for our Integrated Services Division. And our Chief of Staff, Dr. Lauren Hooten, will be joining them as well. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you so much, directors and President Draper and Superintendent Kingsley. Thank you so much, and community. Thank you so much for having us tonight and inviting us to give you updates on SEAC and our community outreach efforts. So I wanted to talk a little bit about our roles with SEAC to start with. And so my role is to attend and be a supportive member. I give updates to them and I take their feedback and I bring that back to my leadership team.
And my role is as the SEAC coordinator, and I help to facilitate and coordinate the meetings and maintain documentation and order food.
So in August, you all shared your top priorities, and it was based on your conversations and also community comment. And we took that information and they fell into 3 categories, and it was membership, what goes on the agenda, as well as feedback loops. And we took that to the September SEAC meeting, and I'm going to go ahead and let Barb share with us what were the results of that.
Yeah, so I also wanted to just jump back a minute to say the purpose of SEAC is as an advisory role. So really to provide advice and recommendations on topics that impact special education and to improve our special education services across the district. So like Jody said, at the September 25th meeting, our task was to review the feedback from the Board of Education meeting and see how we could revise the SEAC charter to address some of those concerns. So this feedback is what came out of that meeting, and it's documented on, the structure of the meeting, first of all, is we explore a topic either by presentation, or in this case it was the charter, break into small groups and have discussion about it. And then from those small groups, break into 2 larger groups or combine into 2 larger groups, synthesize that information that was discussed in the small groups, and come up with recommendations or action steps in a large group action statement. And then that's what informs the action statement that gets delivered to the presenter. So in this case, this was the feedback from the membership documented on those action forms. So their ideas for expanding membership was to add paraprofessionals from all levels, add a child find representative, add an athletic director that could address unified sports topics, add a student representative, and continue to find diverse representation, and continue to ensure that the number of parents is greater than the number of district staff. Let's see. As far as the meeting structure, they talked about changing the location to a midtown, more central location. We did that last month. We'll probably go back and forth. And then there was a recommendation on the documentation to continue with no public comment, but to create public feedback opportunities outside of SEAC. In terms of the agenda, the recommendations were to provide opportunities for the membership to provide input on topics, dedicate time for updates on action items from the previous meetings, have more topics per session, and balance the needs of the district for feedback and the needs of the membership, and prioritize topics relevant to families. And so as part of that, a survey was sent out to the membership. Everyone, wasn't secret. And we gathered some information. We did not get a big response, so sent it out again, and have gotten a little more response. So we'll be reviewing those topic ideas in our January meeting. And then the feedback loop, invite Board of Education members to attend SEAC. We do have 2 representatives that are alternating sessions. And we will be presenting an annual report during the Board of Education meeting at the end of the year.
Another form of feedback loops that we're incorporating is a standing agenda item. So whatever we've presented the week before and they've given recommendations on, we try always in the next 2 sessions to come back and say, thank you for your input, and this is how it's being applied in real time. So an example was we went over a program evaluation. There was a lot of great feedback. I really appreciated it. What I said to the board, to the committee, was that sometimes we don't see the forest through the trees, and it was really nice to see their perspectives and to see the holes. And so I was able to make some changes to that program eval, and I brought that back last time. So that has been really helpful. I wanted to say that we wanted to talk a little bit about our parent outreach, but I just wanted to be really known that parents call me on the daily. I meet with parents every week. Parents can ask for an IEP meeting at any moment, and their teams will accommodate that. The assistant directors and Barb, we meet with families all the time. So what we're going to talk about next is additional opportunities. So not our norm, but things that we're doing to increase that dialogue and to increase those opportunities for communication.
So last month, we hosted an Integrated Services Spanish Night. It was a pilot program, and it was really organized by Danny Zuniga Torres, who's an ILS teacher, very passionate ILS teacher at Lopez Elementary. And he got this all organized, and it's a pilot program that was a collaboration with LCE, Language, Culture, and Equity. We had sessions that were in Spanish, and we hope to expand it to the whole district in the future, but this was just kind of a trial workshop.
We're also starting to have listening sessions. So last year we had community forum nights at different schools, and parents came and they were presented information, and then we had almost like a focus group where they had questions and answers, and some of them were open-ended. But the feedback we received is that parents really wanted to talk more privately about their issues, and so based on that feedback, we started these listening sessions. Parents can sign up for them for a 30-minute individual session. It would be with Barb, myself, and their area assistant director, and it can be any topic that they choose. We're getting people signing up. We have dates scheduled for December, January, and February. This was advertised through email in the newsletter and on social media, and we will continue to get the word out. There are also through different times of day. We realize that some parents can't come in the morning, so we have midday sessions, we have after-school sessions, so we're trying to provide a variety of different times for parents to sign up for these. We also had a more informal kind of meet and greet. We had one at the Future Ready Center, I believe that was last week. We had 7 parents, would have loved more, but we did have some parents, and it was great camaraderie between each other and sharing information, and we're going to continue to have these at different times of the day throughout the school year.
We had a parent survey that went out within the newsletter that I'll talk about next, but it's still open, and hoping to get more input about what topics, what parent workshop topics people are interested in, what times of day work for people to attend events and activities, and just give them space to give us feedback and comments. And then we started doing a monthly newsletter in October. It is going out monthly through email to families of students who are supported by special education. And really the goal is to just share information and resources and provide a way for families to engage with us through that survey or other ways. Yeah.
I think that's our last slide, but I wanted to open it up for questions or feedback. Just know that definitely wanting to always continuously improve and open to hearing other ideas and suggestions.
Well, thank you so much. Other questions? Looks like, Jim, you have one.
Yeah, thanks for running the Spanish session especially. How was attendance at that? You didn't say.
Oh, sorry. It was, it was kind of low, but it was kind of a first effort. I think there were probably 15 families maybe that came to that. And it was really the family liaison at Poudre had individually called every single family from Poudre High School. So really did a great effort in trying to get people there. So
Yeah, I'd give yourself some credit. 15 didn't sound low to me.
yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
Thank you guys for putting this together. Jody, I really appreciate you taking the bull by the horns and trying to get a fresh start in your new role. I think this is really important work. We've heard feedback for several years now about the need for more interaction between parents and integrated services. One thing I would suggest, I know the community comment that today we heard about public comment at SEAC. My understanding is that that had been tried in the past. You know, this is a very emotional, a lot of times emotional topic for people. It's their kids. They're going through some really hard things, so it can get emotional. It can get heated. My understanding is it got kind of intimidating for some members of SEAC that ended up quitting after one session. I think you guys have told me about that. So I understand why that might be a challenge. Jess and I were on the DAB committee. We also didn't have public comment. It's a group of like 50 parents, so it's a big group. So it's hard to manage that. That was one of the challenges. But one thing that I remember is we would get feedback from parents occasionally via email. And they'd send it to the DAB general Gmail account, voicing their concerns. The exec team had access to that email and would read that and discuss that. That might be a way to get feedback into the membership of SEAC. I don't know how many total members you have, but it might be good for you to share those emails so that it can spur meaningful and constructive conversations. You're not alone. You know, that kind of message can be exchanged between the SEAC members. 'Cause I think that's one of the criticisms is if they're not allowed to have public comment about a certain issue, how do each family know that they're also having those issues? And I know some of these other talks are ways to do that, but I think this would be a good way to insert that into the conversation at a SEAC meeting without the intimidating or the emotional, because our emotions can run wild, and so I think this would be a good way to do that in a constructive way. So that's just a suggestion.
No, I appreciate that, and I just want you all to know that I don't make any of the rules for SEAC. I'm really there just to support, and they did discuss it. We just looked back through our notes, and there was that one comment that we put on the slide that was made about public comment, but I think it's worth bringing back to the group. There's a few other things that are loose ends with the charter, and we'll be revisiting them in January. And I think that's a great suggestion. Thank you.
I would also say that on the website, on this webpage for SEAC, it does say that if you have comments or suggestions to contact me, I'm the contact for that. And so that is on the website. I haven't received anything, but it's there.
Other questions? All right. Well, thank you both so much for all your work that you do and for this great presentation. Really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right, so we are going to switch gears now and talk about a couple of other district committees that involve community participation, starting with the Debt-Free Mill Levy Oversight Committee. So we'll start again with a thank you to the voters for authorizing the Debt-Free Mill Levy so that we can create such a committee to oversee how those funds are spent. Historically, in the district, we have always created an oversight committee for any ballot measures that are passed, and that oversight committee is essentially charged with the functions that we will talk about with this group tonight, which is to primarily regularly monitor the implementation of the debt-free mill levy, the program, the expenditures that are associated with that, and then to help provide transparency and assurance that those funds are being used in the way that we have promised the voters that we will use them. So this committee, once it is convened, will be charged with reporting out to the board at least annually, essentially providing an update on their oversight of the expenditures associated with the debt-free mill levy, and we'll have a couple of co-chairs who will be responsible for providing that update. We'll talk about committee composition here in a moment. But really, we're hoping to provide a lot of information to assist in maintaining public's trust around how these funds are being used in the district. So a couple of sources of information that this group will be given will be the expenditure information from our finance department, specific to the debt-free mill levy, and I think this group has probably heard in the past Dave say that we'll be tracking these funds in their own fund within our budget, so we'll be able to report out on that specifically. We'll also be providing with this oversight group with the master schedule of projects to be completed using these funds. So some of the work that was described earlier tonight, for example, would end up on that master schedule of projects that the group would take a look at as they're looking at the expenditure of funding. We will also ask that the members of this group provide regular updates to leadership in the district, so the superintendent and cabinet, and that they also work with our communications team to provide regular updates to our community as well. As was mentioned, we will stand up a web page. You can look for that sometime around February of 2025 that will have information about how mill funds are being expended. One note here is that this is not a decision-making entity. So oversight committees historically are not decision-making entities. Their job really is not to make recommendations about specific projects to be funded through these mill dollars, but rather to oversee how those dollars are being spent and assure the voters that they are being spent in accordance with the ballot language. So what you're seeing here is the list of members that we would bring into this committee. So we're looking at a committee of 17 members. 6 of those would be appointed district staff members, and then 11 would be selected by lottery. So appointed staff members would include the chief of staff, the chief finance officer, the lead assistant superintendent, and then 1 representative from each of our employee associations to be identified by that employee association. I do want to note this is a little bit of a change in our structure for committees for the positive in really ensuring that our employee associations have a voice in this process going forward. We haven't historically had these dedicated seats, so we're excited to bring that into the process this time around. We will also have 11 members who are selected via a lottery process, so that will be 4 principals essentially representing each of the levels in our system, 4 parents or guardians with students who are currently enrolled in PSD schools, and then 3 community members who reside within district boundaries. We will make an effort to ensure geographic distribution by ensuring that there isn't more than 1 representative from any single school that's filling in these particular roles. And at any point, if we have a committee member who decides that they are going to depart, the committee will backfill that role in the committee as well. We are looking for lottery selected members to serve 2-year terms. We recognize that when you start a committee, everybody has the first 2 years together, and that creates somewhat of a challenge with maintaining historical knowledge over time. So what we've done in the past is ask some members to stay on an extra year to create a stagger, so we create that continuation of knowledge over time. We will ask the committee to meet at least twice a year. If they would like to meet more frequently, they certainly can do that. That would be a decision made amongst the committee. Because this is an oversight committee that is dedicated to looking at the expenditure of public funds, these are open meetings. So if observers wanted to be in the room and listen into that group's work, they certainly can do that. Once we convene the committee, we'll post all of the logistics to that webpage that we'll create as well, and then the co-chairs will work together to plan all of the agendas for the meetings and the specifics of the meetings as well. And those co-chairs will consist of 1 appointed member and 1 lottery selected member to be determined by the committee itself. Our expectation for this group is that they really maintain the best interest of the entire district as they're looking at how these funds are expended and not focusing too much on a single school community. We're also asking members to commit to attending those twice annual meetings, and if they are missing multiple meetings within the school year, then we'd ask them to step off of the committee, or if a member was not acting in accordance with the charter and the expectations outlined here, we would ask them to step off of the committee as well, which is our standard practice for district committees like this one. As I mentioned, we will also have the communications department stand up a webpage that is dedicated to this committee and their work. This is where we'll report out on plans for spending mill dollars on a regular basis, and then the communications team will work directly with the committee to provide broader updates to the community when they are necessary. So we would anticipate regular updates going out after this committee meets and throughout the year. So that is an overview of the Debt-Free Mill Levy Oversight Committee. I'm going to pause here and ask if there are questions or comments on this committee. Kevin raised his hand.
All right. Kevin, go ahead.
I don't have to go first just because I raised my hand. If others have questions,
No, go ahead.
it's just up there. But I think my question will be brief. I appreciate that thorough overview, Dr. Hooten. My question when I was looking at the composition was, I wonder if you could shed some insight as to why some of the membership or the membership criteria will be a lottery system and not more intentional with its selection. And if we think back to the long-term planning steering committee from the spring that was stood up, it was an application process, I recall, and there was a sort of a selection criterion used. So I'm wondering, it's both a question and a comment. I'd like to learn more about, the prudence of it being a lottery system, and also I'm curious as to what the other board members think about maybe being a little more intentional about who we select. And the reason I say that is because I think that this committee is like all our committees, but this one in particular right now is going to be very, very important. We're on this crusade to rebuild our trust. Thanks again to the voters and to our community for stepping up to the plate and trusting us with the necessary funds that we're going to need to do the work that Dave and Brian and others are talking about tonight. I think giving this committee some more legitimacy, we could think about the composition. I'm looking at, I think it was the 3 members from the community. I wonder if there's an opportunity there to be a little bit more selective in who we would choose. And I don't know who that would be, but I'm thinking of someone that would have a little more financial, logistical, perhaps architectural gravitas in our community that's expressed a willingness to show up and serve. So those are my thoughts. So I had the question posed to Lauren and Brian and others, and that was my wondering, and I'm interested in others' thoughts.
Sure, so I can start just speaking to why we landed on lottery here. We've selected committees different ways in this district. We've done application processes, we've done lottery processes in the past. For a committee like this that is intended to represent sort of the cross-section of voters who support this measure, we felt like lottery is an appropriate way to go. We actually also spoke with Martin Carcassonne at CSU about this, and he indicated to us too with this committee and the one we'll talk about next that actually lottery is a system of selection that many entities are going towards, so kind of becoming more of a best practice in that space. So that's where we've landed at this time, but we're certainly open to feedback. I would say if we're going in the direction of an application process looking for specific expertise, it would be really important for us to clearly define what criteria we are looking for and how we would evaluate that.
Thank you.
Other questions? Go ahead, Connor? Carolyn, okay.
I'm just going to be the devil's advocate for the other side of that for lottery. I would think that lottery is a more fair way to do this because everybody has an equal chance to get on the board and on the committee. And I don't think that we want to put our finger on the scales when we're selecting people for this committee. I think a lottery makes it transparent and fair.
Thank you for that. Connor, did you have something?
Dr. Hooten, can you tell me more about in the past, how has it been recruiting people for these committees?
That's a great question, Director Brokish. We historically have often heard great enthusiasm about committees, and I will get like 3 applications. So I would say that often there is a lot of discussion of the committee and not necessarily a lot of community maybe follow through on applying to serve on the committees and particularly serving over the course of a couple of years.
So that was kind of my question, and not to get into the weeds, you might not have thought about it, but what is going to be the requirement for quorum on this committee?
I think we would do probably a majority of each type of group, but we have not clearly articulated that yet.
And then I have a question on, so one representative from PEA, ACE, and PACE. Would it behoove us to have 2 representatives from each? I know it increases the numbers, but it also gives us the chance that if one can't make it, it's still, all the information still gets back to the PEA, ACE, and PACE. I don't know if that's, it's just a thought.
Yeah, we can certainly consider doing that.
Other questions?
Do they simply have like a backup instead
We
of
could do
them both
backup.
attending?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's what DAB did, triggering thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, it's what we do as a board too. We have somebody who's the standing person on the committee, and then somebody who goes in when somebody can't attend. Just as knowing that information needs to get back to ACE, PACE, and PEA would be good.
I like the idea. I think one of the things that I'm wrestling with in my mind is that this committee is intending, at least from onset, it might change based upon the will of the committee, to meet only twice throughout the course of the year. So I think having backups, you may lose continuity. Again, I think the spirit of the request is good, and I'm certainly open to it with staff, but I think that would be one thing that I'm just kind of trying to help make sense if they're only meeting twice a year. Making sure that those people are able to be at the table, I think, is really important. Just food for thought.
Yeah, so maybe considering doing 2 of each of those, so bring your total to 20 members. I don't know if that becomes too unwieldy, but something to think about.
We appreciate the suggestion.
Other questions? Okay, thank you.
So we're going to transition now to the Comprehensive Planning Committee, which is also a new committee that the district will be standing up. For those who have been around in PSD for a long time, you might recall that we have historically done long-range planning committees more as a committee that does a particular project or a set of work and then is disbanded. This Comprehensive Planning Committee is intended to be a standing committee, so one that continues to exist in the district over time, kind of like the DAB or the DAC, that sort of thing. So this standing committee would be charged primarily with monitoring, evaluating, and making recommendations to district leadership specific to facility utilization, boundaries, the possible need for new schools if we were to enter a growth phase as a district, including temporary modular placement in areas of the district where that may be necessary due to growth, and then large-scale renovations as well. The work of this committee is specifically informed by 2 district policies, so District Policy JC and EL 2.3. Both of those are available on the PSD website for those who are curious to take a look at them. But they essentially dictate that changes to boundaries are the responsibility of the board. So that decision would lie with the board at the end when a committee and staff bring a recommendation forward. So the specific responsibilities of this group are to start by reviewing and understanding those 2 policies that I mentioned, and then also to take a deep dive into the work that has already been done in the long-range planning space in the district. So that would include looking at the Facilities Planning Steering Committee report from the spring of 2024 and the work that they did. Also looking at the Small Schools Committee report from 2010, as well as the Master Planning Committee work that was done in anticipation of the 2016 bond and the Boundary Committee that was associated with the opening of new schools as well. So we had asked this group to take a look at that historical information as they're grounding themselves and getting started. We would also ask that they really spend time reviewing and understanding data that are relevant to the work that they'll be doing, and I'll provide a list here of some of the data that they would start with. And then their first primary charge as an entity would be developing criteria specific to enrollment and building utilization that would inform possible conversations about boundary changes, consolidations, new school constructions, modular placements, that sort of thing, when conditions warrant in the future. So they would be charged first with coming up with those specific criteria. The district would provide to this group a plethora of data. You're seeing a list here of the data that we typically provide to long-range planning or comprehensive planning type of committees. If there was additional data that this group decided that they needed, we would help to support the acquisition of that data to inform their work as well. We're also asking that as this group starts to do their work and starts putting together recommendations, that we are very intentional about sharing that information with district leadership before we start sharing that information publicly, so that we can make sure that we're communicating with all facets of our community kind of in a sequence as information and recommendations are being developed. As I mentioned, if the community needs any additional resources, we would work with them to determine what those resources are and then to provide them through the district's procurement processes as necessary. This next bullet point, subject matter experts and representatives from schools will also be brought in to support committee work, I think is particularly important when we talk about a committee this large. So what you'll see when we look at the composition of this committee in a moment is that we're not trying to necessarily have a representative of every facet of the district's operations sit on the committee, or every facet of the community that might inform this work sit on the committee permanently. Rather, we will bring folks in as subject matter experts as the committee is doing their work to help inform that work going forward. So if, for example, we decided that we needed to talk with the county about something relevant to this work, we would work with the county to bring in the appropriate subject matter experts to inform the committee as they're continuing to move forward. From the district side, you'll see, for example, there is not a transportation representative in this list of membership. Again, that would be sort of the subject matter expertise that we would bring into the committee if we're at a point where we're looking at changes that could potentially impact transportation systems. The same with school representatives. So if we are at a point where we're talking about changes that might impact a particular school, it is at that point we would bring in school leadership and other representatives of the school to speak to that school's needs, as opposed to expecting those who are sitting on the committee long-term to represent any one school's interest in this particular work. Again, this is not a decision-making entity. The role of this group is really to provide recommendations to staff, which would then come forward to the board. So this is the list of committee members for this particular group. So we will have 9 appointed members on this committee, 1 assistant superintendent, a representative of facilities and operations, as well as finance. We will also have representatives from integrated services and language, culture, and equity. Again, a representative from each of our employee associations that will be identified by that association, and PSD's district architect as well. In this case also, you'll see that we have 13 members selected by lottery, 4 principals representing essentially each of the levels, and 6 parents or guardians with students currently enrolled in PSD schools, 1 from each of our feeder systems, and then 3 community members who reside within district boundaries. We would make an effort through running this lottery process also to ensure geographic diversity across our system in all of the seats that are filled here. We will also have a Board of Education liaison who will be appointed by you all to sit in on the work of this committee. Their goal is not necessarily to participate in the discussion of the meeting, but really to be an observer in the meeting, much like the board liaison function and district advisory board, and then they can share information back to you all as that committee continues to do its work over time. So like the last committee that we discussed, we're also asking members here to serve 2-year terms and not more than 2 consecutive terms. We would stagger those 2-year terms as well to create that continuity of knowledge once we seat this first group of committee members. We are asking that this committee start out meeting bi-monthly, and I will clarify here, bi-monthly meaning every other month, so not twice a month, unless this group decides that they would like to meet more frequently. The agenda for their meetings would be determined by the co-chairs, which would consist of one appointed member and one lottery selected member. We will also develop a web page for this group's work so that we can regularly report out on what they are doing, and the members of the committee would be listed on that website as well. The communications department will provide support for communicating through that web page work. We are also asking that this committee present in a public meeting to the board at least twice annually, unless you all ask for more frequent updates from the group. And we're asking that they present at least 3 times, this is cut off on the slide, at least 3 times annually to the superintendent and cabinet as well. So the expectations for members of this committee are to maintain focus on the best interest of the district as a whole versus individual school communities. So this sort of speaks to this idea of bringing in subject matter experts where they're needed and really asking the permanent members of this group or the seated members of this group to think about PSD as a whole in their work. We're also asking that those who volunteer to be a part of this understand that it is likely that they may have to recommend changes at some point and that can be challenging work. We also are asking that this group really commit to conducting committee work within the space of committee meetings, so with the group that's been seated for this purpose, and that we're really intentional about when and how we're sharing out information to the community. We will also ask that folks that join this group be really intentional and reflective about any internal biases that they may be bringing into the work as well, and really center themselves on being advocates for all students in our system. To help support the group in that space, we will do an onboarding training prior to starting the committee work, which will include orientation to the use of PSD's equity framework so that we are all grounded in that framework. Much like our other committees, we do expect folks who volunteer to be a part of this to attend. If they're missing multiple meetings, then they would be removed from the committee and we would replace them on that committee going forward. So just next steps for both of these committees, and then I'll take questions on the planning committee in particular, is that we are at this point planning on distributing applications for both committees in PSD Now, which is the district's newsletter, in January of 2025, and we would complete the selection process as soon as is feasible after that. So questions or feedback on the planning committee?
Thank you so much. Are there questions? Go ahead, Scott.
Thank you very much. This is really important work, and I'm so glad that we're getting to this now and moving forward. I have 2 questions. The first is kind of dovetailing on what you were just talking about with the timeline. When do you anticipate the first meeting of this committee to be?
I would say, reasonably speaking, if we put out applications in January as planned, we would probably be notifying folks sometime in February, meaning a meeting maybe towards the end of February, beginning of March, depending on scheduling.
All right, and then this is, that makes sense to me. This is a more specific question. I saw a bullet point that says this committee is not a decision-making entity in selecting or recommending specific educational programs is outside the scope of this committee. What's an example? I'm not understanding what that means.
Sure, so a specific educational program, for example, would be something like core knowledge programming. So something that is essentially defining the instructional program of the school.
Go ahead, Jim.
So let's see. I'm actually a little worried about this committee, and let me tell you why. I read back through the recommendations from the Long Range Planning Committee that we had in the spring, and one of them was to have exactly this committee that you're proposing. And I think what that committee couldn't know at the time was that we would have a mill levy where we would say, one of the things that we sold in the mill levy was support of neighborhood schools, and that basically we're not planning to close a school for the next 3 to 5 years, okay? Unless there's some catastrophic enrollment problem or, all those things that probably won't happen. So I was at the district advisory board, let's see, this was December 2nd, and you covered all of this to get feedback, which was great. And it was an interesting discussion because there was a woman in the feedback session that She was also on the spring planning committee, the spring long-range planning committee. And what she said to me, or in a very respectful way, by the way, was, "Are you actually going to use the results of this committee?" And I think given that we're not planning to close anything for the next 3 to 5 years, I have to wonder, are we making a good use of the committee members' time for the next year or two doing this kind of work? I can see getting things going at some point, and I think there's a need for that, but I'm nervous that we're hitting this just a little too early. So I don't know, you can decide, or we as a board can decide what we want to do with that, but maybe you form the committee and you have less frequent meetings initially, or those kinds of things. So there's lots of ways to solve that issue, but I want to be really careful that we're not wasting our volunteers' time.
And Jim, I think it's a great point to bring up, and one of the things that when I was looking at this, what I'd like to see is not a recommendation yearly, but when this group gets stood up, have a recommendation at year 2. And to make sure that take that first year, and my thought process was basically run them through PSD leadership. So that they have a real good understanding of not just how their school works or how they think school finance works, but an actual real understanding of how PSD works. And that could take about a year. When people go through PSD leadership training, that is about a year to do that. And I think that would be great for a couple of reasons. One, to learn, but 2, to build that camaraderie and have that working relationship built up over the course of the year. And then going back to the specific things that you were going to bring up, what was it? It was EL 2.3. What we've done previously. That's also a long-term study. I would hate to see just that stuff being thrown at you and saying, okay, you're going to go study that on your own, and then we're going to come back and have a conversation about what to do next. I think those things, having the foundation of how PSD works, and then having the background knowledge of what was done previously or why things were not done previously would be extremely helpful. And so I see starting, if you were to start now, I would start there and say, but we don't want to even see any recommendation until at least year 2, possibly even year 3. And honestly, my thought process on that is about, we'd be looking at boundaries at that point and seeing how boundaries are affected because we are putting in that moratorium of not talking about school closures for 3 to 5 years. Boundaries, on the other hand, are things that we're just shifting. We're not talking about closing schools. So that would be my thought process, is that it really would be a great training opportunity for those people to have that background knowledge, to understand what it is we have done previously, to understand why we didn't do other things previously, and then to kind of start from there. But then, have them do the meetings, but we don't necessarily need to have the reports about their meetings until, I would say year 2. That's just a thought. Yeah, Carolyn.
So I hear what you're saying, Jim. I think you're right. Maybe it could be too long of a runway, but I'm not sure that it is, because when we stood up the last committee, I think what we heard is they felt really rushed, and it was taking a time for them to assess and collect all the data that they felt like they needed and to agree on what the facts were. And I think that some of that work can happen now, before they have to start thinking about recommendations. So maybe in the beginning, not meeting so often, but I do think that we need a longer runway for them, just based on our last experience.
Scott?
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Carolyn. And I think, I understand where you're coming from, Jim, because it is going to be a long process, but I think that's part of the reason to do this is we saw that we had a credibility and a trust problem, and I think this is one step to build that trust back, is that, hey, we are now taking a measured, slow, long-term approach to this problem, and hopefully it won't be a problem in 3 to 5 years. But I think this committee can not just look at, you know, boundaries or consolidations or any of that sort of thing, but growth. Like, hopefully we have growth. That takes a long time to figure out. Carolyn, you had to deal with that going back to 2016. Like, that's a big deal, and we have the fruits of that planning now with Wellington and Timnath, and we're seeing great things from that. So I think it's both issues, and I think we'll build our credibility back if we have this. You know, it'll be easier for the community to accept decisions that are really hard if they know we took our measured time to do it.
And Kevin has raised his hand, just as a note.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Thank you, Dr. Hooten. I agree with a lot of what's been said. My comments are going to build upon those. And Jim, here's what I think. I think that it's kind of an amazing thing of where we are right now, because this was one of the firm recommendations of the long-term steering committee. So here we are, and we're standing this thing up, and we're talking about its purpose, and we're talking about its composition. So I like the comment that you made. I think I'm closer to what President Draper has said, though. I think that this is, and there's a reason my thinking is this should be a little bit of a slower burn before decisions or recommendations are made in the consolidation or closure, for a couple of reasons. First, as President Draper said, I think that first year is going to be really about forming and norming and establishing the why and what they're going to do, what the criterion they're going to review when they're having these discussions in year 3, 4, 5, et cetera. I do like the boundary update every 2 years. I think that's great. So if we were going to do this by year, I'd say the first year is really purpose, scope, clarity, and what are we actually going to accomplish in the next couple of years. 2 could be the heavy lifting of, you know, a boundary analysis. That's going to give our community the time that I believe they've essentially bought in that mill levy override, and that we keep saying 3 to 5 year moratorium, but we can't do this work instantaneously and expect good results. So it's going to have to be a both and so as we're analyzing the enrollment trends in our district, we need to be putting the framework in ready if the worst case scenario happens again. And I think that's the conversation that our community was begging us to have, is to slow down, let's scrutinize this a little bit more carefully. And so I think by the time we get to year 3, we're going to have a really good data set of where we are as a district as far as our enrollment trends. I'm discouraged to hear that we're already 441 students down. I tend to be an optimist, and we've got opportunities ahead of us to do some really important work. And while we're on that subject, before I get to composition, because I've got a couple comments about composition, we've heard a lot of our community and schools and affected people from last time saying, you know, please hold us harmless and leave us alone. And I want to challenge that thinking a bit, or just maybe revise it slightly. That suggests that a school is its own universe and should be responsible for increasing its own enrollment. And I think that our Blevins comes to mind. They're a great school that's doing a lot of outreach right now, doing engagement right now to get their numbers back where they need to be. But they can't do it alone, and nor can any of our schools. So I want to kind of challenge the thinking that this is your problem and put it back to PSD. This is our problem. One of the sessions I attended in Casby was about school turnaround, and it was about the role of the local board and anticipating when turnaround conversations are coming from the state, and then trying to get out in front of it, being proactive when you see declining performance. Now, again, we're talking enrollment, which is different than academic performance, but I think they're inexorably linked. And so I think we have a duty as a board, as a governance team, to start really both supporting, but also scrutinizing our enrollment trends in certain sectors, and to start thinking a little boldly about what we're going to do to address it. I think just hoping the problem is going to go away on its own in 3 years with the money from the mill levy, I personally think is wishful thinking. I think we need to be doing more things, and this committee to me is one of those things. It's not just analyzing a problem, it's also what are the support measures we can offer to these schools that are in need of enrollment decline right now, financially, logistically, what are those things? Is that appropriate for our governance team to take up? But that's a conversation I think we have to be having. And so just hoping the problem goes away, I think, is inappropriate. The second point I was going to make is about composition. I've been thinking a lot about the compositions of these various committees, hence my question last time on the accountability one. The only one, and I invite the cabinet into the room, they're thinking this, the composition of the long-term steering committee in the spring was hugely inclusive of our community members. And so that again, to me, gives it both the transparency and legitimacy of that nexus between our community being part decision makers or part problem solvers with our staff who are doing this hard work every day. And so because of that, I'm encouraged to hear that there's going to be a board liaison. I think it should be a rotating one personally, because I think you're going to get a lot of different views from different sessions from board members. But I also challenge, and this, again, I invite some conversation about this. I'm somewhat concerned about having an assistant superintendent on that committee and not an observer role. And here's why. For the same reason, I think that it would be somewhat inappropriate for me to be a member of that committee and start thinking, you know, including my thinking in the matter and saying, this is what I think, this is what Director Avella thinks, you know, you all ought to do. That carries a different weight than, you know, another person or the community that's not going to have to make the vote, right? The same is, it's similar dynamic, I think, for an assistant super, which is the composition of those PSD staff are going to be looking at that person as somewhat their boss. And so I think they're going to be taking the lead from an assistant super in lieu of, you know, maybe getting creative with their own thinking and challenging status quos and things like that. So I invite some conversation from other people on that. That was just one thing I had about composition. But again, I think in order to legitimize whatever recommendations are made, we need to be incredibly thoughtful about who's going to serve. I mean, we're already well on the way, and I credit the thought that's gone into this already, especially with the staggering approach. I'm a huge proponent of that too. But those are my unfiltered thoughts.
Thank you, Kevin. Anybody have any? Connor, it looks like you got something.
So Dr. Hoot and I support creating this committee wholeheartedly. Composition, I'm okay with. I suggest having, at least in the first year, meetings quarterly. And also for the rest of the board members, I think that we should kind of wait to see how many people actually sign up for this. I think that we may be unpleasantly surprised that the vigor at which the community came out for the Long Range Planning Committee last time will not be there this time.
Other thoughts? Jess?
I mean, since everybody's talking. So I remember when I was first on the board and when Timnath opened, at that time, I want to say he was a planner, a district planner, but he recommended that because we had not looked at boundaries in ages. And part of that, I think, was just that it's hard. Part of it was probably COVID. But even at that time, he recommended doing it at least every 3 years. And I feel like having a committee that consistently is at least checking in on it is valid. I also think that we still, despite stopping last year, we still made some decisions this year with regard to Timnath, with regard to our transitions programs. If we don't have any committee to do that, we're continually just dependent on ourselves and hoping that our community is going to follow. Whereas this provides some level of predictability. We are consistently talking about it. What we heard a lot last year was that it was shocking and nobody knew the problem was coming. At least if we're consistently talking about it, you know where our data is, or if you don't, it's not because we hid it, right? We are being more transparent by having a committee that's consistently looking at it. I also agree with President Draper and a lot of the other folks that have been talking about having a timeline, right? I appreciate the first year being establishing the baseline of our system, establishing how our system matches our community's values, making sure that they do build rapport, because I think that was also a challenge last year. They had to hit the ground running. There was no time for them to just sit in community with the data and absorb it. They had to start making decisions immediately, which was part of the challenge. So I like the composition of the committee. I don't have strong feelings at the moment about the assistant superintendent voting or not. That was a new thought that I hadn't considered. I think that's mostly what I wanted to say, but I appreciate the committee. I think it's a good idea. I think it's a good thing to do long-term, so thanks.
Go ahead, Jim.
I'm still just a little concerned, but I can support. Thanks for your comments.
Yeah, and I very much support this. I think it'd be great to have this just standing committee so that we know, and again, my thought process is that if we're more fluid about this, if we are knowing that every 2 years we're going to get a report about boundaries, we know that, in an even year, we might get a report about a boundary that may say we're suggesting you move something. They may come back and say, everything's great. We actually just looked at everything and everything's great. But at least then we know it's on the radar. It's not a surprise to people. And that's something that we, even in previous years when we look at boundaries, that has been a surprise. That has been an emotional reaction. And I'm not suggesting that we go back and forth. I'm just saying that it would be nice if we had data, numbers, the why, and the suggestion. And then it becomes ours to wrestle with. So I think something like that every couple of years would be really great. Did you have something, Jim?
Just, does anyone from administration want to comment on Kevin's question about the administrative superintendent and, I don't know, the power thing and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think, some of the feedback that we've had over time, like I'm thinking back to the small schools committee that was in 2010. And there were principal representation on the committee, but those principals maybe had their perspective of what their school did, and then maybe tried to speak for other schools. And so I think the idea behind the assistant superintendent role is to have a perspective of all of the schools and being able to, think through implications as well as, the programmatic parts. As far as it being like a voting member or anything like that, I don't think that that's as important as it is that you've got someone who is, really involved in the day-to-day operations of the schools in the district, which I think a principal can do a really good job of providing maybe their perspective on, here's how it runs here in my local context. And you need somebody who has that broader view of all of the schools and the programming and the interdependencies with one another. And so, thinking about who would serve that role would be something to consider.
Go right ahead.
So I'd like to echo what Dr. Kyle just said. I don't, like her, I don't have any specific position on whether it's a voting member or not. But I think having them strictly as an observer would prevent a lot of institutional knowledge from being front and center within the work of the committee. So that's, my food for thought on that particular topic. Just can I say a couple just other things? Would that be okay?
Yeah.
Are you sure? Oh, Kevin wants to respond
Kevin,
to
did
that?
you want to respond to that?
Yeah.
Just briefly, what I think I heard was Dr. Giles volunteered herself as tribute, a little bit. No, I mean, that makes sense. And the reason we're having this discussion is that I haven't made up my mind on anything. That's the tension that I see. And I think Jim and I had some pretty good conversations about us, the board members, not being in the room at all, because we didn't want to compromise the integrity of the organic nature of the recommendations that were flowing. And so that was my only concern. If there's a way we can thread that needle, because I think Superintendent Kingsley, you make a good point. We want our best and brightest and our most talented in the room when we're having these tough conversations. I just don't want it to be steered one way too heavily. And the other thought on that too, and I think I'm picking up something that maybe you were alluding to, Director Brokish, maybe you weren't, but I don't want to speak this into existence, but I do like having decision points in align with what we had told our voters we would do. So I think that we've got to understand what the problem is and what we're going to do in years 1 and 2, and then year 3, 4, and 5, we have to make a commitment that we're going to actually resolve the problem. And I think the reason I like this committee being stood up is because it has the air of permanence to it. It's going to outlive, the directors on this board. And by what I mean by that is that this committee is a crucial.
Okay. Kevin, if, it looks like you're not with us anymore, so I apologize. Yep. Scott did it.
Oh, no, he's there.
And you back?
PSD TV has taken over control. I don't know.
Oh, okay. All right, well, Kevin, if you can hear us, just jump on back in when you can.
While they're trying to get them back, one quick clarifying question. Will these meetings, like the previous committee, be open to the public?
The intention is not for them to be open to the public because it is a working committee that will be discussing information that we'd like to be sure we're sharing with the community in a measured way.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. I think, something that I believe that we all can collectively agree on is that our community right now is craving stability. It's craving deep transparency. And in many spots, it's asking for some level of healing. And I think as we want to be transparent, we also want to make sure that sensitive information and ideas are being circulated in those particular meetings. If those got misconstrued in any way and miscommunicated in any way, it could cause a lot of harm, especially knowing the emotional underbelly and current that is running through our district today that I think we need to be incredibly sensitive and mindful of. I think to build off what many of your comments were, this makes this work not an event, but it makes it a way of work in this district moving forward. And last year's long-range planning efforts, felt more like a sprint to our community than a marathon. I think we heard that loud and clear, and I think this is being responsive to that work, which I'm really, really grateful for. If there's something that I could ask the board to weigh in on and to be, as a collective and individually, very direct and explicit with your charge to this particular committee, is a couple of lessons learned from last year that I think we really have to think thoughtfully about making sure that there's no scenarios for a specific set of time. Because I think if we are out there and have just promised the community that we've bought they have bought as a result of their voter support, 3 to 5 years of stability, barring any unforeseen circumstances, I think creating scenarios that are naming particular schools in the short term, and I think this was what Director Brokish was alluding to and many of you were building off of, can cause a lot of emotional distress, even though the intentions might not be to act on it for 3 to 5 years. So I really believe this board needs to have continued dialogue prior to launching this committee that gives a very specific set of parameters on when you would even want to entertain, or maybe that's to be determined, right? And I don't know if that's the right way of approaching it, because I think the ambiguity leaves people in a space of, is it now, is it next year? But I think getting very clear and explicit around when scenarios would be appropriate, when would criterion be appropriately named, because criterion, the data is what the data is. So even discussing publicly the criterion, schools will start to name and identify themselves in their respective communities will be. So I think being mindful of when you would want to, as a collective, entertain the thought of some of those things surfacing out of this committee, I would just ask to be as direct as possible with that comfort level. And I think a couple of you appropriately suggested a timeline of whether it's not until year 2 or, so some of you were building off of that, but I didn't hear from all of you. And the last piece that I would ask, and it kind of builds off of this, and I don't know if you feel that this is appropriate, one of the things, the steering committee last year did an incredible amount of work in a short period of time. And that's really commendable, and we're a better district as a result of the work that they've done. But I think one of the lessons learned as they were working in partnership with this board and in partnership with this district is we lost control of the scope of the number of schools that were being ideated about, which created a ripple effect around not knowing whether it's the entire district is involved in this, is it some of the district, some parts. And I think a lesson learned for me as the superintendent is I would like for us to think about how to incubate this change in a more thoughtful manner moving forward. And I think we all, in hindsight, like I've learned from my mistakes, and I think we're all learning from these circumstances, to really have a proof of concept that in the event that we have to make hard decisions in the future, that we can prove to this community through a trust and a human-centered approach that we can actually do it in a way that they realize they're getting something better as a result of that change. And I think our ability to do that at a scale of 4, 6, 10 schools, I think is really, really, really difficult. And I think we have, in the spirit of rebuilding trust, have to think about that in a very, very small scale to prove to this community that we can do this well and we can do that with them and not to them. And that's feedback that I've heard from a multitude of members. And I think that requires this board to be very direct around how you want to see them manage scenarios and manage change. And I think leaving that up to the group, I think, is something for us to be thinking about and talking about. I'd love your thoughts on those things.
First thing, Kevin, I believe you're back, so if you'd like to jump back in, that'd be great.
I'm sorry, I was on a Havelda tear, and I don't know where I got cut off. One of those times where you're talking to someone on the phone and you have a great thought, and then you realize that no one heard it. So I don't know where I cut off, so I'll try to truncate as best I can. It sounds like I was talking very similar with what Superintendent Kingsley was just mentioning. Was one, I do think that we need to have this committee as a very permanent structure, and that it will outlast any kind of candidate or board director that may be running to do certain things. I think we need to be very intentional with the purpose and the timeline of decision points. So in year 1, we're forming and storming. Year 2, it's boundaries, whatever it may be. In year 3 to 5, because that also mirrors the commitment we made with our community. I think I've got lost again.
No, you're there.
Okay, great. Sorry, my screen froze. So I think in year 3, we'll have enough data to suggest this is where the enrollment trending is going in these sectors of town. I don't know how to thread the needle as far as not naming schools or not. That's a different conversation. But I think having the criteria established, and then by year 3, 4, and 5, we're making decisions, or the board is making decisions as to what to do with that. Whether the enrollment's going up or down, we're going to have a good arms wrap around it. It's not a sudden thing. It has that transparency that we were seeking, and it's been a long, slow burn. So I think to some of the points that Jim may have been making, which maybe he didn't, I don't want to speak for him, but one thought is we're right back where we started 3 years from now, making with no decision based on a new composition of a board. And so I'd like to have the decision points be pretty firm. And I think to Brian's point, we need to be very direct about what this committee is going to be doing and the work that it's going to be doing. And I think that's a both and. It's not an either or. We can address declining enrollment and support our schools where they're hurting in this next 2 to 3 years with 4A, with other bold measures. But we can't ignore that trends may not go in our favor. So we have to be ready for that. And so my suggestion is in year 3, 4, and 5, we have the hard conversations and decision points about consolidation, closures, what or not. But we're using a very specific set of criteria on applying it across the district, and that's kind of what I think. I think the work has to go on, and the decision points have to be very clear in the timeline.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
I hate to agree with Director Havelda, but I think he makes a really good point. Just kidding. I think that's an awesome point, actually. We want to give future boards the opportunity to finally make a decision and not kick the can. That's how we got into this problem, is years and years of kicking the can. It's easier to do that and have the community love you than to make those hard decisions. But if we have this committee doing the work where it's, the criterion is there, and I agree, we don't want people, guessing, who's on the block, if that is even an option. Hopefully it won't be, but I think it's really important to put the structure in place now as our legacy so that future boards can make this decision in a measured, smart way.
I like what you said, Scott. I like what you said, Kevin. I'm still stuck a little bit though. Like, if I come out next year and I say, "Hey, gang, here's the enrollment level that you will be considered for future closing 3 years from now," I just think that's going to set off a lot of anxiety in the community that is really inappropriate, then, I believe. So for me, I would much rather have that discussion at the 3-year point, because I think that's the time that, if, it depends upon how soon we would need to close a school. There's a lot of hypotheticals here, right, of when would enrollment at a school get below a certain level that this committee proposes that that school should be closed, right? So I think Superintendent Kingsley was going after is, I don't want to do that too soon because I think we cause a lot of unnecessary angst too early in the system.
And I think in my mind, that's why I like the idea of if you stand up the committee now, you get the year to, what Kevin was saying, norm and storm, and then you have that second year to form, right? And then you can go ahead and that second year be looking at, I believe we need to be looking at boundaries for year 2, and still not be looking at school closures, because we have said we are not looking at those until at least 3 to 5 years. So once having looked at those boundaries, then we're able to kind of reset for the following 2 years to say, okay, those boundaries, what has that done now for our enrollment numbers? Where are we seeing, enrollment continue to drop that we cannot work with boundaries on that? And then go ahead and have that conversation. Do we need to do something beyond boundaries? Because I think the first 2 years, that's what we're looking at in my thought process. Yeah, Connor, go ahead.
I'm feeling like we're starting to beat a dead horse here, so. But I don't think we're asking for a vote tonight, right? So otherwise I'd call for the question.
That sounds, question has been called, so to speak. So, do you have what you need?
I think we have feedback that we can take back and then determine some next steps from here.
Okay, thank you so much. And thanks for all the hard work that's been put into forming these various committees and just making them work. We really appreciate it. So,
Kristen, I know that was the last thing on our agenda, but being sensitive to the fact that no board member can ask the superintendent to do something without agreement from other board members, I was tonight impressed by Sudha Uktak, who came to talk to us about scoliosis screening. And I know we've had other students come and talk to us about really important issues to them. And I wonder, I was just looking on the Scoliosis Foundation's website, and I see that Colorado is one of the states that does authorize scoliosis screening and does allow it by school nurses or third parties. And I guess I'd like an understanding of what we do, if anything, to screen kids for scoliosis. And so I just right now would just like some information about it. And I wonder if this is one of those things that's low-hanging fruit that we can put in place for, a minimal financial amount. So I just wanted to see what the rest of the board felt like.
I think exploring that would be a great thing.
I was very inspired by what she shared, and I have that as an action item already in my debrief tomorrow to look into what our current state. I will tell you that I personally benefited from those screenings myself in school, and have many friends that benefited from them, same as the young person from Rocky shared today. So I think I want to look at what our current state is, be able to share with this board what the opportunity is, and I'll come back with you to you early on in the new year with what I find. Okay, yeah, thanks for asking.
Thank you. All right, and with that, we are now adjourned at 9:56 p.m. on Tuesday, December 10th. Good night.
I'm going to beat everyone home.